All right, guys, picking up where we left off the other day. So, this is basically the continuation of the banner review that we've been doing for all of 2025. We are in the midst of the actual summer event for this year. And we had already reviewed the first banner at that point in time. We had gone over Artoria Caster Berserker and Clovan Einsvern, and I had tried to really emphasize to you guys why I think this is probably one of the most stacked banners in the entire year, and that pretty much everyone should be rolling here. Again, it's not a guaranteed gotta do type deal, but it is one of those where this is a very strong banner, and the units here can be really good for your account. So everybody should be considering, everyone should be looking at this banner and not just writing it off. But it is what it is. So now we've made it to the second summoning campaign. This one is going to be the first male summoning campaign, as you guys can see. We have Oberon, Gawain, Lancelot, Saber, and Tristan. Pretty much we do get a different set of CEs due to the fact that it is the male banner. And just kind of quickly looking at that here first, you can see Summer Break is a rare all-attack CE that ignores defense. Ignore defense is a fairly rare effect on CEs. It's also got Buster Up and NP damage. This can be a very decent craft essence if you have a Buster unit and you really just need that ignore defense effect. Again, I think the issue with it would be the charge that it lacks, but it is still a strong craft essence and probably one worthy of leveling up all the way to 100 for the occasional thing. Rounds Beach is an okay CE for a 4-star, nothing too much to write home about. In Sickness and Health here, really same deal, not too much really that you actually need to pay attention to on that one. None of the units here are new, so we won't be going super in depth on any of them. But just a brief aside, Oberon is still the strongest damage amplifier in the game for general purpose use. There are a couple of units that can out-amplify him, but they are very niche in how they do it, whereas Oberon works with literally every single unit in the game and just makes their damage go bonkers. Obviously, the trade-off is if you basically use his third skill on somebody, they are getting slept, and there is no way around it other than getting them killed beforehand. So at the end of the day, that is his trade-off that limits him. But darn does it feel like a slap on the wrist when you consider the fact that you can just pop this on turn 3 in a 3 turn, and then it will really have no actual impact on you. So Oberon, just right off the rip, a very, very strong support. He is the game's first 70% charging support. So where we have several 50% chargers that exist out there. You also have people that do party charge. Oberon himself does 20% party charge, but he can actually charge a single unit 70%, and that's the first time the game has ever done that. That had a massive impact on team comps, especially for things like farming, and really just being able to allow other units to kind of go all the way and be able to 3-turn and be able to loop and that sort of stuff. He's really done a whole lot and has been probably one of the most influential units in the entire game. If you're a newer player, you should definitely be looking to roll a copy of Oberon. That being said, there are some very lucrative units this year, and this banner timing could not be worse. It is absolutely done on purpose. It is right alongside one of, if not the strongest unit of the year in Castoria Berserker. So it is the way it is. I'm going to say people are going to have tough decisions to make in that regard, but I do believe, if nothing else, even if you're just looking for him as a pretender, Oberon can still be a strong AoE buster pretender. So he is definitely somebody that merits your decision on this. And I will tell you again that you should try to acquire him, if not sooner, then at least later. So you may be able to punt for a later banner on him, but yes, he is a unit that everybody should try to get on their account. Gawain Saber is in an interesting spot. He is story locked. I'm going to say he's a little bit outclassed at this point by some of his other 4-star contemporaries, especially given the fact that Salter exists. But the Sunbro here can still do quite a bit of decent work for you. Again, he does have extra damage on Sunlight Battlefield, and unlike Barghest, at least he can bring the sun on his own, allowing him to, again, change the battlefield effect to sunlight. So he can be a decent serviceable AoE Buster Saber for you, but ultimately he's not normally going to be one of my main pillars in that regard. Lancelot Saber here, still a very strong single target arts saber. We do have units out there like Hoku Saber that are welfare that can kind of counter him a little bit, but Lancelot Saber has always done one thing amazingly well, and that's just crit up a storm, which is pretty good as an arts unit. Means he's got pretty solid card performance. His biggest issues were always his lack of survivability, which he still has, but also his general like NP damage. He did, however, just recently on JP get an NP strengthening, so that did help him out quite a bit in the damage department. So he is still a very, very solid single target saber for you guys, even in the face of some of the welfares. Tristan is a 4-star single target quick archer. He is very similar to Balbon Sith. In fact, Balbon Sith is based off of him. He does a little bit of interesting stuff. I think he's a little bit clunkier to use than she is, but they are actually extremely similar. He's got 50% charge. He will MP seal himself, but thankfully with the upgrade to his first skill now, he can cleanse that. So ultimately, end of the day, he's still a really solid unit. He actually does have a steroid now, and he can be a decent option for your single target archer. All right, so that is summoning campaign number 2. Number 3 here is going to be our next lineup of new units. So I'm going to have to go through all 3 of these, and this one's going to take a bit. We do have the return of the original craft essences, which, as we already mentioned, there's nothing here that's too strong. Dazzling Moon is an okay one, but ultimately, at the end of the day, I wouldn't be rolling necessarily just for the craft essences. All right, taking a look at Mel Ruler here to begin with. There was a lot of hullabaloo when Mel Ruler first came out. People were basically anticipating that she would be as strong as her Lancer form. Mel Ruler is a strong unit. Mel Ruler is not as strong as her Lancer form. I can say that unequivocally because her Lancer form has a dominance over her class that is pretty much unparalleled at this point. Mel Ruler is very strong. Mel Ruler can be the strongest ruler. However, Mel Ruler can also be outclassed by some of her other competition. That's because there are just some really strong scaling rulers in the ruler class. She is an AoE arts unit, and she does a couple of things really well, particularly charge. So again, as you guys can see, she does have a double arts, double buster deck for maybe a little bit harder carding there, but she has arts up on her own for 3 turns of 30%, critical damage for 3 turns of 30%, increasing her own damage against enemies with chaotic alignment for 3 turns. This is a nice little 30% power mod right there, and the improvement of basically having some damage cut. Her second skill here will increase her own critical star absorption for 3 turns, 500%. It will gain critical stars every turn for up to 10, so basically a fragment of 20-30. And it will gain critical stars in addition when on waterside or airspace battlefield. That's right, Melisson is your first airspace battlefield unit ever in the game. So again, this would be up to a whopping 20 extra stars, so 30 per turn if she happens to be on either of these effects. That could be very nice for her in terms as an arts unit for just being able to just absolutely crit up a storm. She will just also have a 10 crit star bomb native effect. So again, really, really solid there on this skill in terms of generating crit stars and allowing you to crit, all in a 5-turn cooldown. Third skill here charges her own gauge. It is only 80% as opposed to the 100 of her other form, but there is no like shifting of her form types. You see, one of the reasons that Mel Ruler is not as OP as her Lancer form is because Mel Ruler does not shift NP types. She is just AoE as opposed to her Lancer form, which can be single target or AoE. And again, this is still a very strong effect. It does mean that with her maxed out mana loading skill, she can go 0 to 100. So at minimum, she could be like somebody that could just kind of come in and clear a wave for you with no assistance from anyone else. Can also increase her own NP damage by up to 30% for 3 turns. And basically, she can also grant herself invincibility for 2 attacks, 3 turns, which is definitely a nice thing. You can see she does have the unique Fairy Knight passive that's also going to increase her crit damage against enemies that are man attribute in addition to everything else. And another noteworthy thing is going to obviously be the NP proper. It's a 5-hit AoE NP. Not a whole heck of a lot of hits, and this will actually be one of her bigger issues because again, she doesn't really have a whole lot in the way of actual NP gain. So she's not going to be your best refunder. But given the fact that she is an arts unit, she still will refund. And given the fact that she has 80% charge, you really don't care. You're going to make this happen one way or the other, and even over the top of like 111 nodes. So ultimately, at the end of the day, really refund is not a concern for you. She increases her own critical damage by an additional 30% for 3 turns before her NP. So again, this will keep stacking every NP and get stronger. She'll deal damage to all enemies. She'll deal 150% extra damage to enemies that are Earth attribute. There you go. She is super effective Earth. She'll actually be, again, like one of several units that has come out this year that is super effective Earth. So a little bit like units like Ereshkigal and stuff that had the super effective Earth niche kind of down pat are kind of getting that eroded at this point in time, as a lot of units are getting added with that. Again, it doesn't mean that like, oh no, like she's any worse or anything like that. It just means that there's now more competition in that niche, and it's easier to find someone to bring it. Her overcharge effect increases her own attack for 3 turns, activating first by 20%. And so again, this can scale up and get you even more. It's going to keep stacking. She's going to keep getting stronger with every successive NP. So again, Mel Ruler, not a weak unit. She has anti-chaotic, anti-earth, and also crits harder against man. So definitely a nice, solid unit. If you're looking at her basically for your go-to AoE ruler, she can absolutely be that. I can attest to she does good damage. Again, she is in the higher echelon of rulers in that regard, usually duking it out for the number 1 spot. But is she necessarily like someone you have to have? No, absolutely not. It's up to you to determine if you want to roll this second banner. This second banner, though, is definitely not a bad banner. What do I mean? Well, let's go to our next unit. Right here, we have Kate Ku Sir Priestess, aka Balbon Sith Summer. It's a mouthful no matter how you want to pronounce this. But basically, she's almost got 10k attack as an AoE buster pretender. Now, your issue here is going to be, do you actually need her as an AoE buster pretender? And I think this is a definite quandary, as a lot of people will have units like Oberon out there. You will have also gotten an AoE buster pretender as a welfare if you played the Halloween event from the prior year with Eliza out of that. So again, I don't think you necessarily have to roll Balbon Sith, but Balbon Sith is still a strong unit and a fun unit to use. What do I mean? Well, basically, just kind of skipping through everything here straight to the kit, you can see she increases the party's attack and defense for 3 turns by 20% each. She also extends the party's buff duration on HP regeneration and NP regeneration and star regeneration by 3 turns whenever she pops this. And then extends all enemies' debuff duration for poison, curse, and burn by an additional 3 turns. That in and of itself is an interesting effect, but you're going to see this kit gets really wonky as we get in. She will remove 1 enemy's buffs. That is a strong effect, definitely a nice thing to have. She will also reduce their debuff resistance for 3 turns by 30%, their critical attack chance for 3 turns by 30%, and then reduce their NP gauge by 1 every turn for 2 turns. So again, basically, you're going to reset their NP gauge 2 consecutive turns, as well as a 30% charge here. This does mean as a 30% charge with an AoE buster unit, you can brute force her to 3 turn from a 50% starting charge standpoint. Her third skill here increases the party's NP damage for 3 turns by 20%. And again, this can operate maybe as sort of a singular damage dealer in a multiple damage dealer setup. So she could be used a little bit to kind of help somebody else get there and deal a little bit more damage. And you can see she will also increase the NP damage of allies that have the Wrath of the Enshrined Deity status for 3 turns, as well as charge the NP gauge of all allies that have it by 20% as well. So definitely some interesting things, but what is this Wrath of the Enshrined Deity? Well, I'm glad you asked, because basically Balbon Sith Summer has this, I'm just going to say, grocery list of effects down here in her passives. So you can see her first one here is if she is in Ascension 1 or 2, she increases her own critical damage against enemies that are man attribute. If she's in Stage 3, she does the same thing, only instead of by 4%, now by 20%. However, there's a trade-off here, because down here for the next passive, if she is in Ascension 1 and 2, she will increase the NP generation rate of allies with chaotic alignment by 5% while she's on the field. She will also increase the NP generation rate of allies that are good alignment by 5% on the field. If she's in stage 3, it's the same deal, except now it's only 4%. So to me, this is definitely not nearly as much of a trade-off as the prior one, but it is what it is. However, on all Ascensions, she has a 500% chance to grant party buff on defense buff, including submembers, that literally will grant them Wrath of the Enshrined Deity buff for 1 turn whenever they take an attack while she is on the field. So again, anyone that gets hit while she is on the field gets Wrath of the Enshrined Deity. That will increase their critical damage by 10%. It will also, again, further increase their NP damage and their charge when she pops the 3rd skill. It's a little bit of a convoluted unit, but she does have the ability to kind of be really strong. And if you thought that was a lot, here we go. You guys can see the NP is a 6-hit buster AoE NP. What does it do? Well, it basically heals 1,000 every turn for 3 turns, charges the NP gauge by 10% every turn for 3 turns, and gains 20 critical stars every turn, 10 critical stars every turn for 3 turns. Then it will deal damage to the enemies. Then it will deal super effective damage to enemies with man attribute. This will stack with the Koyanskaya's man attribute power mod for multiplicative scaling. So kind of like Morgan Le Fay, Balbon Sith Summer is going to be very strong against man attribute targets. She will inflict curse and poison of 2,000 damage to them for 3 turns. And remember, her first skill can extend literally all of these effects. And then we'll reduce their attack by 50% for 1 turn, making it very difficult for them to actually deal effective damage back to you. Her overcharge increases her own bust performance for a singular turn by 20%, but it does scale upward nicely. So again, Balbon Sith deals pretty good damage. Kind of a unit that I'm going to say you really don't have to have, but if you're already going hard on Melissan Ruler, you'll probably get several copies of her, and at that point she can be a very serviceable AoE pretender for you. So again, I do think she is an interesting unit. She seems really complex at first. It's really not that complex. So ultimately, at the end of the day, there's a lot of stuff you can do with her, and she could just be a fun unit because, again, fluffy rotate. So a lot of people will roll her just for her NP. If you've never seen it, I'm not going to spoil it, but go watch it yourself and you'll see exactly what I mean. And last but not least, UDK Barghest here is going to be another limited unit on the banner with Mel Ruler and Balbon Sith Summer. So this is going to be Barghest Summer form. She is a single target archer. What do I mean by that? Well, she's also an AoE archer. That's right. They literally took Melissan Lancer's mechanic and gave it to Barghest instead. To me, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it is what it is. So it's a very interesting thing. Realistically speaking, I do have some issues with UDK Barghest. Not obviously in that capacity, but more in like this capacity. This is not nearly as thick as her artwork is. And so the issue at play here is going to be that Barghest, to a couple of degrees as an archer, feels very undertuned. I actually really hope that they do upgrade her, because one of her major issues is going to be right here. She does struggle to loop. She does have kind of problems in that regard. She's only got the double arts deck here. She does have 2 quick cards. Thankfully, the hit counts are okay. She increases her own attack for 3 turns by 30%. She increases her own crit damage by 50%. And she will grant weakling protection for 3 turns that will recover the party's HP by 500 whenever they normal attack. However, in addition, any ally that is a 3-star, 2-star, 1-star, or yes, 0-star, if they are alive on the field, it will increase her attack by 20% and gain 10 critical stars every turn for 3 turns. This does mean that you're going to want to use her alongside of like Paracelsus, Asclepius, Shufu, those type of units. but it also does mean that, again, you're not going to necessarily be using the most charge intense units in the game to support her. So that issue there is basically going to make her refund issues even more apparent. Taking a look at the second skill here, you guys can see she will charge her own gauge by 30%. This, to me, especially with her refund numbers, it should probably be 50 at minimum. I'd still even maybe like to see more. So hopefully this is the skill that gets an upgrade, but we'll see. It grants the party invincibility except self for 1 turn, recovers the party's HP except self, and then reduces the party's skill cooldowns by 1 except for herself. There could be some additional niche uses of this somewhere down the line, but as of right now, this is not too great of an effect. It's going to be nice for obviously things like challenge content, but don't expect to necessarily be forming basically the equivalent of a Koyanskaya comp with arts. That sort of thing will not happen at this current point in time. Her third skill here increases her own NP damage for 3 turns by 30%. However, it also has the option of changing the type. Sorry, she is base AoE and single target, not base single target and AoE. I did get that mixed up. So again, she will change her own damage type from AoE to single for 3 turns. So again, this is a very interesting effect because it means you have the option. So unlike Melis and Lancer, where whenever you press the third skill, it will change her to the later ascensions, forcibly changing her to AoE, you don't have that issue. You get to choose whether or not you want to change to AoE, or sorry, change to single target or stay as AoE. So again, the choice is yours. She will also grant herself the super large trait for 3 turns. Magic resistance, madness enhancement, Fairy Knight, all of this is kind of interesting, but really Thundercloud Eater is probably her more interesting effect. As you can see, she will gain NP gauge by 5% every turn spent on a burning battlefield. She's also immune to burn and basically the spread fire debuff as well if she's on burning battlefield. So definitely some interesting things. This could lend herself to being paired with somebody that actually can change it. But at the current point in time, there's no really kind of good way to do that, I would say. Not that there aren't units that can't change it. There are. They're just not necessarily going to pair well with her. Taking a look at the NP is, again, 4-hit AoE base here. They'll deal damage to all enemies and remove offensive buffs. It also removes any burn and spread fire statuses that they have as a demerit. Thankfully, there's nothing in her kit that actually causes burn, so you really don't have to worry about that too much. And again, the overcharge effect will increase arts performance for 1 turn, activating first 20%. If you switch her to single target, it's still a 4-hit NP, only now it's single target. So arguably that's kind of better, but realistically it's kind of the same. She's going to deal damage to 1 enemy, still remove their offensive buffs, still remove their burn and spread fire, and still have the same overcharge effect. So quite literally, it is the same NP, single target or AoE. All that changes is whether or not it is impacting all or 1 enemy, as well as the scaling of the individual levels of NP. So again, UDK Barcast, fun unit to use. I really like the concept they were going for. I don't think her design is bad. I think her numbers need adjustment. She really does struggle to loop, even with you trying to sit there and brute force her. So to me, she is a unit that I really do hope gets some sort of tweak down the line. Hopefully sooner rather than later, but we'll just have to see. So, in summary, is this third summoning campaign one that you have to roll? To me, especially due to the 4 stars that are present here, it seems a little bit weaker than the first banner. I prefer the first banner over this one. And I know people are going to be like, oh, well, you're a Saberface fan. I'm not speaking about this from biased standpoint. I'm speaking about this from a gameplay standpoint. I think gameplay-wise, the first banner is the better option. That being said, you all like who you like. You can roll whoever you want to roll. Melisson Ruler is not a bad unit by any stretch of the imagination. And again, neither are really the 4 stars that are with her. They're each serviceable. They can each pop off in their own right as long as you support them well. So should you roll the banner? That choice is yours. Again, the issue is going to be, what about some of these other banners that are available right now? What are your priorities and who do you need? But again, this banner can still be a solid one for you. Now, moving on to summoning campaign number 4, we have the return of Tez. So quite literally here, Tez is just going to have also the female CEs on rate up. We've already talked about Tez earlier in the year. He's definitely an interesting unit. But again, I'm going to say this is more of a, hey, if you've maybe already like done all of your gauntlet of rolling for like summer and maybe like earlier in the year as well, and you maybe avoided Tez on the front end, this would be your second chance to try and pick him up. Again, the choice is yours as to whether or not to go after this. I don't really recommend waiting for this one. I think it'll be better to roll for him earlier in the year. But again, it does depend on your status and how much you wish to actually roll in the game, like whether or not you're free to play or a dolphin or a whale or something like that. Again, that sort of thing can dictate how much currency you actually have to save, how much you have available to roll, and whether or not this is an easy banner or a hard banner for you. We do also get the 2022 Summer Rerun banner, and just kind of a brief look at this. Lady Avalon, still, again, a really solid option. I do believe she had another banner earlier this year. She's basically your arts equivalent to Merlin. Can definitely be a good pickup for challenge support. And even for like looping support for arts comps, she can still be decent for you. Ibuki Doji Berserker, still one of the stronger AoE Berserkers in the game. She's been a little bit surpassed in raw output by Musashi Berserker at this point. But honestly, 50% charge and Earth super effective modifiers on an AoE arts Berserker is just kind of nuts. So you can do a whole lot with her, and she can be a very solid unit for you. Shisho Ruler here is, Scotty Ruler here is going to be, again, sort of an upgrade from original Scotty. She is also a meta support. She's a 50% charging quick support, but she does have, instead of quick crit up like her caster counterpart, buster crit up instead. This sort of does open up the options available to you for a potential crit if you wish to crit down a wave. Just keep in mind, crit's not necessarily the most consistent thing, so this can be an issue for you trying to rely on it. She does have a little bit of a quality of life improvement with her second skill over Scotty's second skill, and she does kind of have a better third skill than Scotty's third skill. So at the end of the day, to me, Scotty Ruler, a much more offensive and much more quality of life version of original Scotty. The big thing that she lacks is the group-wide survivability that OG Scotty's NP provides. So ultimately, at the end of the day, I recommend picking her up, but it can still definitely be a difficult choice depending on how you feel about quick at the moment, as well as what your other role plans are. She will for sure get another banner. So again, do you want to roll here? That's your choice. Gareth Saber is very much in the same boat as Gawain. They are very similar in what they do. However, Gawain has the benefit of an NP interlude. Gareth desperately needs some kind of love. Mostly just because of the fact that her damage numbers are pretty pathetic compared to some of her other 4-star counterparts at this point. I do think she gets quite a bit of hate, unfortunately, in the community, and she really doesn't deserve it. Such a cute unit. Can still be a fun unit to use as well, but ultimately, at the end of the day, the performance is not really there at the current moment in time. Eris Avenger, on the other hand, a very quality pickup for a 4-star arts single target Avenger. She could definitely be a decent looper and boss killer for you, as she still retains the anti-servant skills that her Lancer welfare form has. So again, her having that as a single target arts Avenger does allow her to be a significantly effective boss killer for certain scenarios, especially against certain ruler bosses. She can be a definitely good unit for you, and maybe even your main single target Avenger. Woo caster, definitely in a little bit of a weird spot. Her biggest deal is, again, the undead niche. I don't really recommend picking her up, but she can be a fun and interesting unit to use. To me, there are a lot more effective and powerful casters out there for your AoE caster slot. But again, choice is yours if you want to go after her. Here is the banner timing in this regard, so you guys can see quite a bit of rotating going on, but ultimately, again, you will have a couple of days there. And that's basically going to be it for all of the summoning campaigns in summer. That was quite a few of them, so now we can kind of move on here. The rerun campaign we already covered, so now we are going into September. Now this is where we are going to get the Hunting Quests Part 13. I am going to stop briefly to mention something here. It has been a long time since we have had Hunting Quests at this point in time. You can see there is a summoning campaign paired with it, but again, to briefly denote, you can see there are some NPC support servants, some bond point servants, some limited time master missions, and then, oh, what's that? You have the equivalent of a bone node. Well, guess what? You should by now have an MLB bone CE from the advanced quests. Which means that you can combine this with somebody else's MLB Bone C to actually get quite a bit of an improvement in drops. You also have 90++ nodes in here. So yeah, you can get quite a bit out of this. You have a shell node, a Seed of Yggdrasil, as well as Spirit Root, not Seed of Yggdrasil, and an LB3 Bell node there. You have eggs and stingers. You have Chaos Claws and Cerebral Spinal Fluid. And then, oh, look at that. Dust and LB 6.5 swords. Guess what? You also have an MLB Dust CE at this point in time. So again, both of those two hunting quests, you can be pretty decently effective at how much you pick up. It doesn't mean the other hunting quests are bad. It means the existence of the advanced quest craft essences can help you out even more. So it can be a pretty lucrative time to grind some of those out. The summoning campaign here is, well, a doozy. So I'm going to try to go through this one pretty fast as well. All of these are old summer units. Definitely there is some potential here in some of these units. Okidosoji Saber Altar here, aka Okitan Saber, is a pretty effective, quick AoE looping saber. She is a Black Grail looper, and she is very simple and easy to use. I can definitely attest to her damage output and her refund capability. And yeah, she doesn't even necessarily require a 333 node in order to loop through. So again, she could be a very effective AoE saber for you, especially if you really like her design. Kama Avenger, also a very strong AoE arts Avenger. In fact, a slight bit stronger than Space Ishtar, assuming she can land her charm effect on the enemy, which is fairly easy for her to do. But again, I do think she could be a really solid sort of alternative to Space Ishtar. She is 50% charging as well and does hit quite effectively hard thanks to her super effective modifiers. Moon Cancer Kiara was at one point the hardest hitting unit in the game for AoEs. So again, she can also be a very solid option for you. She's AoE arts. Her biggest issue, she doesn't refund too well. She does have scaling charge, though, on her second skill. It scales from 30 to 50%, depending on the effects of her unique, again, sort of, how do you call it, like, currency mechanic that she has. And again, she can be a really, really solid AoE or just in general boss killer Moon Cancer for you. Again, damage is not really anything that anyone can deny. Her biggest issue will be her refund, but you can kind of still brute force that and make that sort of thing work over time in a challenge fight. Abby Summer, definitely a little bit less on the damage end. She is still an interesting unit when it comes to debilitating and buff stripping as an AoE buster foreigner. She is a 50% charging unit. They did actually recently give her a buff on JP. I think she's in a better spot now. She's not necessarily the end-all be-all, but she can be a very useful unit to you, especially for that AoE buff strip. Anastasia Archer here is actually a pretty solid option, especially because at the time that she originally came out, it had been a long time since Kuro Archer, so a lot of people did not have access to that welfare. Again, she's 50% charging, arts single target. She could definitely do some interesting stuff and hit pretty hard in the process. Canis Ryder could honestly probably use some love. Her kit's actually like decently synergistic. She is quite interesting as a crit, like sort of card refunder, and she can work very well at that. But again, you are beholden to card RNG. She doesn't have any charge baked into the kit, so that's going to be one of her biggest issues. And the single target damage is not necessarily the strongest, but it is at least serviceable. Again, she's single target buster. I do really like her animations. She's a fun unit to use, but ultimately I hope they do kind of circle back with her. Ilias Veal Archer here, another interesting one. She's actually a pretty good AoE quick looper. The issue is a lot of people kind of at this point end up having Atalanta. What Atalanta kind of gets done with pure refund, Ilias Veal, on the other hand, will get done more with like brute force charge. So in that regard, she could definitely be a more consistent unit depending on node structure. I do think she is a solid pickup for that, but don't be expecting her to compete with the likes of like Gilgamesh or something like that in damage. So ultimately, at the end of the day, it's still a 4-star, and it is what it is. Tomoe Saber did get a nice upgrade finally. It did really help her out. To me, she could still use a little bit more in that department. It really felt like they held her back on purpose as she came out right before Muramasa did, and Muramasa just absolutely got every single one of the like draws in terms of skills compared to Tomoe Saber. Tomoe Saber is still one of the more beautiful summer servants probably ever released. Just really cool, awesome designs. But gameplay wise, I think she's going to relegate herself to more of an arts crit saber in a lot of scenarios. She can crit really hard. It's one of the things I like about her, with 100% crit damage baked into her kit. But ultimately, choice is yours as to whether or not this is something that you need. Corday Caster, actually one of the stronger single target casters in the game. She is arts single target. She has basically the ability to split her charge. She could either use it all on herself or use half of it on herself and half of it on someone else. She can also protect the party with AoE dodge, and definitely has some interesting modifiers due to the fact that she scales super effectively against anybody that has skill seal. She has a skill that will immediately put skill seal on an enemy, and she also has a skill that will proc skill seal over time on an enemy. So it is a little bit RNG for trying to 3-turn, but again, she's very, very consistent, very loopable, and pretty solid in terms of damage, especially if you can land that super effective skill seal. BB Summer, still a very fun unit to pick up. One of the more fun ones, if you ask me, in terms of like she can actually facilitate card lock. And she's really the only one in the game that can do that. So she could be really useful in certain niche scenarios where you just really desperately need the same unit's cards over and over again. Her biggest deficiency in that regard is that you have to get the unit's cards in the first place. But assuming that you can either somehow automate that or you just get lucky, BB can basically lock those cards in and do a whole lot for you. But that's not all this unit does. She is a 50% charging Buster AoE Moon Cancer. Her damage is not terrible, and she does AoE drain and has quite a bit of survivability. So I do think she could be a decent option for you. Bryn Berserker, honestly, the damage here could be a little bit better. She is a Buster AoE sort of looper in that regard. She ends up having quite a bit of charge per turn. She also has the Brynhilder's Beloved niche. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I feel like while her designs are really cool, the biggest issue that she does have is overall damage output. Murasaki Shikibu Rider, I can't sing her praises enough. She is a debuff-based unit. Normally, I'm not too hype on those types of units because there's a lot of things that can go wrong, especially depending on how an enemy does conduct themselves. But Murasaki Rider basically has every possible tool that you could need to make those debuffs land and is really, really strong at it. She's got a very complete kit in that regard. She's single target arts. She does loop extremely well. She does have really good card performance. She does have the ability to crit quite frequently as well. So I really do like her. She's not a welfare, but she is a very, very fluid unit. And again, you guys can see the pairings. We've basically paired up 2 of the 4 stars with the first SSR there, and then Canis basically with Kama, 2 more with basically Moon Cancer Kiara, and 2 more with Abby Summer there. So again, really, really odd structure with basically BB being alone on her own on an island. Not really sure why they did that, but it is the way that it is. So again, that's your hunting quest campaign. You could probably expect this maybe a little bit earlier. This may be something that they move up with regards to. NA's scheduling will be a little bit weird, as we'll have kind of a gap as they move the anniversary forward by like a month. But we'll see what they do. They may, again, leave this where it is, or it may come forward a little bit. We'll just have to see. We also got Ordeal Call Campaign Part 2 here. Basically, there is a special quest that gets released here. You get a bunch of stuff for class score, as well as, again, quartz and embers there. And basically, you also get a 2 times great and super suck here, as well as, again, the main quest basically going down to quarter AP for all of Arc 1 and Arc 2, at least through LB7. Yeah, they are permanently half cost otherwise. They also added a shortcut button for the main chapter areas of Ordeal Call, because again, the way the Ordeal Call area works is you kind of have the entire globe, and you're going to be like rotating the globe around. Some people found that annoying, so they kind of just gave you a button to allow you to skip to the chapter. Basically here we also had the special quest. Again, there is going to be some interesting stuff with that. It is a really unique scenario that allows you to fight multiple battles at a time. However, you have to select your party for all of them first, and you cannot use duplicates. You also cannot use party revives. So it is a very interesting battle. Definitely, to a degree, some people complained about it. I felt like it was a very fun challenge. And it's not like anything that's timed, so you didn't have to like get it done immediately or anything like that. So I thought this was a really interesting way of doing it. I'm not going to go over like who it is that you're battling or what's kind of going on there. You can see the summoning campaign here. We are going to get the return of some decently sought after units. We basically get Muramasa here coming back, and it had been, I think, quite a bit of time since his last banner. Muramasa is still a really solid AoE arts looping saber. He's not top dog in terms of damage, even amongst the AoE arts sabers. He's now actually been passed by Void Shiki for that. But interestingly enough, Muramasa, just basically other than damage, has everything in his kit necessary to just completely eviscerate any enemy that he faces. He has invuln pierce, defense pierce, 50% charge, crit damage, extra damage against king trait. So again, you name it, he absolutely can do it. Again, even still saying that his damage is the concern, it's still really not a concern. Muramasa can do very solid damage, especially since he can be a Black Grail Looper. Actually, Doman is an interesting unit. He does actually pretty low NP damage. He's an AoE quick alter ego, but it doesn't really matter because he has 80% charge, so he can absolutely be used to take out a singular wave. And then basically, due to his unique way that he works, he can buff both the attack up as well as the crit damage up of anybody that is evil and chaotic in the party, and he can be doubled up with himself since he himself is evil and chaotic, and so he can gain basically double benefits from this, and this is what results in a lot of double Doman comps being speed clears of certain nodes. So again, he can be really, really effective. He's really good at just buffing anyone that's evil or chaotic, so in that regard, I do find him to be a very useful unit to have for certain scenarios. He's not a gotta have, but he is a very like interesting aspect and tool for that sort of thing. And again, he can operate to the degree such that he can pretty much automate the process of critting down entire waves. Rasputin, we pretty much talked about there at the beginning of the year, but essentially Rasputin's biggest gimmick is that he is an AoE arts alter ego. He basically ends up having necro memes as an actual skill. And while I do feel like his damage is not altogether there, he is at least a decent challenge unit and a very fun one to use at that. So if you really liked him and you missed him on the New Year's banner, feel free to try and get him here. Again, you are getting into the latter half of the year where we're getting away from anniversary and summer. Obviously, you're headed towards things like Christmas and New Year's, so there is that to consider. But again, it is at least a okay time to pick him up, I'd say. So that, again, basically happening early September, maybe a little bit earlier on NA. And then we will get the Evocation Festival. So remember how we said that Summer Kuro had not been around in a long time? Or sorry, original Kuro had not been around in a long time. Well, here you go. Here is Welfare Archer Kuro as she comes into the Evocation Festival shop. You also get Iris Veil. Iris Veil is a very interesting and polarizing unit at this point in time. She has had an upgrade. It is improved her quite a bit. She's mostly a stall unit. Her big niche is that she provides guts to the entire party for 3 turns. But again, the bigger issue at this point in time has been that her ability to get back to her NPs has been a major problem. The buff did help with that some, but to me, she still could probably use yet another upgrade because, again, she sort of is outclassed at this point by the likes of Asclepius, and really just Castoria is probably the biggest unit that hurts her in terms of general protection for the party, since Castoria can just prevent damage altogether. Sieg is still absolutely a fantastic AoE arts looping caster. He's anti-dragon, which is not the best niche for him to have because there's not a whole lot of assassin dragons out there, but it is what it is. He can still be a very solid looper for you in that regard. 30% charge. I think the biggest issue is that he has a 1-turn duration on his art steroid, so you do have to kind of sometimes use it instead to facilitate looping rather than like on turn 3 for damage. So that can be a little bit of a problem with him, but otherwise still pretty effective, fairly solid looper, and again, somebody that can deal good damage for you. You can see we did get some permanent extra master missions. This is when you get the Iris Veil upgrade. It basically increases her healing power for 3 turns and actually gives her a charge, which she desperately needed since her card performance is pretty crap. It's also going to increase the party's NP damage except for herself, which doesn't really matter since she doesn't have an offensive NP, for 3 turns. So it does make her a little bit more supportive and, again, allow her to get back to her NP as well on top of that. So very nice. You can see they did give you a couple more missions basically for completing story in order to get the extra Evocation Festival leaves there. That can definitely help things out. All right, then we have a banner here basically for a lot of the Fate characters, and it is an interesting one. So we've already talked about Artoria via Valentine's Day, so if you want to hear what I had to say about that, go back to then. We did, I believe, talk about Ilya as well in a prior one. We did talk about Miu as well. I don't think I've talked about these other 3, so let's go ahead and talk about each of them. Emiya Assassin is another interesting one. I actually feel like he could probably use another upgrade at this point in time. He's a single target arts assassin. His damage is fairly solid, and he's got a interesting gimmick in the fact that he has a scapegoat skill, which is a targetable taunt. So you can place taunt on any of your allies in order to sort of get damage focused onto them. Ironically enough, it's sort of intended to be used on himself because he does have a tendency to have NP gain issues. And so what it feels like it's trying to do is it's trying to abuse his somewhat better NP charge per attack stat in order to allow him to kind of get refund that way for every single time that he gets hit. Again, I don't think it's the best way to handle it. I think that's a very antiquated way for them to do it at this point in time, and I think they probably should look at that just for his general overall usability. He's kind of, at this point, to me, gotten outclassed by the likes of Chiome and some of the other single target assassins that are available to the player. So to me, he can be serviceable, but he's not going to be your best option, really. And I don't necessarily recommend trying to go out of the way to pick him up. Samurai here is, well, anti-dragon, just like Sieg was. Samurai, though, basically is the dragon killer. So Siegfried is a very, very strong unit. He has anti-dragon power mod and anti-dragon super effective mod, both in the same kit, that stack multiplicatively. So he can deal a crap ton of damage to dragons. That is his major calling. He's a 30% charging AoE Buster Saber. Again, he can still deal decent damage in spite of the enemy maybe not having the dragon buff, because he has had a lot of upgrades over the years. So he is a very decent option for an AoE Buster Saber if you have no one else. Again, I don't think he's a bad unit by any stretch of the imagination. He is sort of kind of the bar, I think, that most of the other AoE Buster Sabers are probably judged by in the 4-star category. And again, looking at our other option here, we have Jeanne d'Arc. I believe I talked about her at Valentine's Day. She really needs her other skills sort of adjusted at this point. And her party-wide protection NP is still fairly solid. The issue at play is it doesn't do a whole lot on the back end of the NP after it's already gone out. Certainly can protect the party for that turn, but after that turn's up, it pretty much is just kind of a wash, as it doesn't do too much. I think Jeanne needs probably improvements for how to get back to her NP, as well as maybe an actual NP interlude to kind of complete the half interlude that she got before, in order to allow her to be a little bit more effective of a party protector and support. So again, I do think she could be at least a decent option for you in terms of a like party protector, but she is very much in contention with like Castoria at this point, outclassed. Again, you guys can see the banner rotation at play here. Again, very obvious and logical pairings, especially if you know who is who. But definitely an interesting one. You get some old CEs coming out here. Pilgrimage to the other side is not all attack, so I don't really recommend leveling it. But if you do manage to get MLB of it, it is a very solid CE. A Moment of Peace is pretty meh, if you ask me. And Azure Magical Girl is actually like low-key one of the stronger Cs that you'll see here. It is all attack stat, 50% charge, and again 30% NP generation at MLB. So it was a very strong CE from back in the day. If you're lucky enough to get MLB of it, congratulations. It is a very, very good one. But given the fact that it is sort of on rate up with other 5-star CEs here, it's a 1 in 3 chance. I don't really recommend trying to get it specifically here, because you might just end up with some of the other CEs. The good news is, if you did try, First Sunrise is also a very good CE. It has been outclassed at this point, but it's still serviceable depending on what you're using. Again, it's all attack scaling, buster up of 20% at MLB, and starting charge of 50%. So again, this could be really good for units that maybe are buster based, but don't actually have buster up in their kit. It's less useful now that Koyanskaya exists, because Koyanskaya has shifted a lot of buster units away from attack up and more towards buster up. So again, that sort of thing not going to scale as well at this point in time. But back in the day when we used to be using a lot of like Waver and Merlin and stuff, this could still be definitely useful to you. Realistically speaking, Bitter Black is actually a pretty interesting CE due to the healing received and NP gen, but otherwise nothing too much really to write home about any of the 4-star Cs. Okay, so that's going to be the summoning campaign for Evocation Festival 4. Looks like they had Kyomoff. Kyomoff is an event that occurs, basically it's a real-life event that occurs in Japan every year. FGO usually goes to it. Usually NA does not get, quote, Kyomoff. Instead, we get another banner that is Kyomoff, maybe with other stuff added in or taken out, renamed as either like the back to school campaign or any number of another things, like a fall campaign, you name it. So again, you guys can see they got a login bonus here. They also revealed the future events that were going to come out. And basically they had a summoning campaign. And this is where Beni Enma gets a banner, as well as Ibuki Saber and Minamoto no Tametomo, which is definitely interesting. Okay, so talking about each of these three units, they're all older. Beni Enma is very interesting. She is a single target arts saber. I do think she has a little bit of competition with the Trung sisters in terms of her being a supportive arts saber. However, she is somebody that will absolutely annihilate chaotic and evil enemies. She's a very good sort of boss killer for certain things. She also is one of the better boss killers in the sense that she actually has party-wide buff removal resistance of 100%. So she can actually make sure that nobody in the party gets buff stripped. So it's a very, very effective tool to be used against certain, annoying buff stripping type of enemies, particularly units like Amakusa that maybe buff strip the entire party with their NP before damage goes out. Something that could be a real problem. So Beni Enma can prevent that buff strip, allowing your defensive buffs to stay intact. Definitely a very, very strong unit for situations like that. In fact, I went out of my way on my JP account to make sure I still picked up just one copy specifically for that purpose. I do recommend everybody kind of try to get a unit like that for their account at some point, but it's not necessarily the most imperative thing to do right out of the gate. Again, Beni Enma is a very solid option. She has finally gotten some upgrades and some attention. So I do think she's a very good unit. I think she's in a very good spot, especially as a single target saber. She could be your devoted single target saber, or just, again, another tool for your arsenal, so to speak. So up to you if you want to try to roll for her here. She's not a unit that gets very frequent banners, but she usually does get one about every year. Bukidoji Saber, I believe we already talked about, but just another brief aside, she is a 50% charging AoE Buster Saber. Her primary niche is undead damage, but at this point, even though she doesn't do bad damage by any stretch of the imagination, she has been a little bit outclassed by some of her other contemporaries, just due to the fact that they have gotten upgrades. Again, she can still absolutely dish damage for you and be your devoted AoE if you like her that much and you want her to be, but she is not top dog in that sense of the word. Minamoto no Tametomo, I actually, at this point, I really like his design. I really like his NP animation. I really do not recommend rolling for him. There are a ton of Buster AoE archers, and objectively speaking, he might be the worst of the SSRs. I don't think that's his fault by any stretch of the imagination. I think that's mostly on the developers for kind of introducing him. He is a permanent unit. You can get spooked by him. And his biggest issue at this point is just that he lacks either charge or damage. They need to increase one of them to kind of put him into a better scenario. Because again, he doesn't really have a major niche to kind of outshine the other AoE Buster archers, and some of them are absolutely stacked, the likes of which, again, you have Gilgamesh, basically Ishtar, Tesla, and even Napoleon, all just doing great damage with niches on top of it usually. So again, Tametomo just sort of odd man out at the current point in time. And again, you guys can see there is your schedule there. Nothing really other than each one of them is going to get their own individual banner. Let's see. Yeah, so there was nothing as well for the campaign. So again, that should be September. Probably expect it like late August, early September. Heck, maybe even early August, depending on how they want to handle things. Because especially if they do it as like a back-to-school campaign, Killmoth could come earlier. One Gina World Tour is another interesting one. This one basically ran again, late September to early October. It was sort of an out of left field event, and it did include Wangina as a new SSR servant. She was definitely an interesting one, a little bit contentious too, because I guess there was some hullabaloo over the fact that she is based off, I believe, like Aboriginal, I think an Aboriginal deity. I may be incorrect in saying that, but it did cause some community debate on the origin of the servant, and again, whether or not it was appropriate, but I'm not going to get into any of that. You guys can see to get a login bonus, there were event bonus units, yada, yada, yada. But realistically speaking, we also got the strengthening to Voyager here, and this is his NP strengthening. You can see it increased his damage, but also increased the amount of charge that he gave to living human allies by 20% now. So again, another sort of small impact there, but something that could be useful depending on who you're pairing him with. Realistically speaking, it was more just the increase to the overall damage output that Voyager so desperately needed in the face of some of his other AoE foreigner competition. Taking a look at the summoning campaign, we had two of them here. You can see your first one is Wandjina and Kriemhild, and then Voyager and Yagyu. So there may be multiple reasons for people to roll for this. Particularly, Kriemhild has long been a sort of often sought after single target arts berserker that really has not had a whole lot of like good banners due to her release being paired alongside Roland. She did get a banner earlier last year, later last year, alongside, I want to say it was the Lotto event, I believe paired with Brynhildr. And that was one that, again, I think a lot of people that really were trying to isolate her did roll on, but maybe that wasn't a good time for you to roll. So this one might be another opportunity for you to acquire her. I will remind you, this is basically post Castoria Berserker. So for those of you that have rolled Castoria Berserker, you probably don't need Kriemhild. But if you just really like Kriemhild's design, or again, maybe you're trying to use Kriemhild in place of Castoria Berserker, this could definitely be an opportunity to either get like more coins or again more NP levels. So it's up to you. It's just something I really did want to point out, as I know that there are a lot of fans of Kriemhild out there. Wandjina is going to be who she's paired with. Wandjina is our only new unit for this event. And again, she is an interesting one. She's got 12.5k attack, so definitely strong in that department. It does mean her carding will be at least pretty solid, even if her skills aren't up. And her HP is going to be the issue there with it being somewhat anemic. Her NP charge rate, not too bad there at 0.75. You can see her active skills here. She increases her own quick and buster performance for 3 turns. Basically 20% each there, so not terribly strong. We usually see things like this being 30%, but again, it kind of is going to be a case of just sometimes they do this in order to tone a unit down. You can see she will grant herself a buff on attack for 3 turns. That will grant herself Wrath of the Elemental buff for 5 turns whenever she normal attacks. She will grant herself Evasion for 2 attacks, 3 turns as well, and you can see the note here is that it enables extra damage on Wandjina's NP. So basically a super effective scaling modifier, essentially, whenever she normal attacks. Her second skill here is Party Attack for 20% for 3 turns, Party Critical Damage of 30% for 3 turns, NP damage of all allies that are man attribute except for herself, and a buff on defense to allies with man attribute except for herself, that will grant Wrath of the Elemental to Wandjina allies for 5 turns when taking an attack. Again, it enables extra damage on Wandjina's NP. Don't worry about the fact that it'll be on someone else. So you can see herself, she is gender unknown and attribute sky, so she's not going to fall under the man niche. So the reason they put in the accept self here is because, in theory, there could be a way to turn Wandjina into man attribute or add it in addition to it. So that's why they're just sort of like future-proofing themselves from that sort of thing. Third skill here charges her own NP gauge by 30%, charges the party's NP gauge by 10% every turn for 5 turns. Something that could be nice for a quick unit is sort of automating some of the charge. This is definitely a good thing for her to have. And recover the party's HP every turn for 5 turns, again up to 1,000. You can see she does have a unique passive here called Cradle the Stars that will increase NP damage by 20% if she's on airspace battlefield. Again, doesn't really like do a whole lot for her though if she's not, and she doesn't really have a way to change it to airspace battlefield. So that is going to be, again, an issue for her. It's there if she can secure it, but if she can't, it is what it is. She is a 7-hit AoE quick. No, sorry, single target quick. I realized literally right as I said it. Foreigner, as we already mentioned. And so you guys can see here, she will ignore invincibility for 1 turn, activating first. Again, always nice to have Invuln Pierce, especially like if it's on the NP, because you just know every single time you NP, it's going to be there. Having it via skill can be good for like carding and stuff like that in between NPs, but having it on every NP is always just going to have value. She increases her own damage against threat to humanity enemies for 50% for 1 turn, so this does make her a threat to humanity type of killer. However, we already have that in MHXX as a single target foreigner, but again, maybe you don't have her, so she could be another option here. I will say, I don't really much care for the fact that they are overlapping with another 4-star that is years older than her. Yes, you can kind of do this in the sense of like she could be made to be a little bit stronger, but ultimately, it does feel like this sort of set them up for maybe a lot of people not to roll 1 Gina. You can see she deals the damage to 1 enemy then, and then deals scaling damage depending on the Wrath of Elemental stacks that she will have from normal attacking or her man attribute allies getting hit. So again, interesting way to get a little bit more damage there. It does mean that you could try to like pre-card the NP or really pre-card any NP in order to get it. The issue at play is if you're using a quick unit and you're using quick supports, you have to be careful maybe not to crit them down and accidentally cost yourself some refund. But that's assuming maybe that you're, you know, again, going to be like in some sort of scenario where you have to kill multiple enemies. With a single target, odds are you're not. You're going to be trying to just instead kill a single enemy. Her overcharge effect increases her own NP damage for 1 turn by 10%, activating before all the damage goes out. It does scale up, and again, would be synergistic with Oberon, but it's only the 10%, so not quite the best. Would be a little bit better if the Cradle of the Stars is activated. Again, at that point, you'd have potentially 30% NP damage to basically double up with Oberon. Again, I think 1 Gina can be a serviceable, good unit for you. I don't think she's a, like, sort of beater type of unit where she's just absolutely going to like destroy any enemy she faces. I think in that regard, maybe they do need to come back and look at her at some point, maybe see what they can do for her to make her stand out a little bit better. But it is the way it is. I think she'll probably actually get more rolls on NA than she ever did essentially on JP, but we'll just see. If she's a unit that you really like the design of, feel free to go after her. Or again, if you just need a quality single target foreigner, I think she can be that for you. So ultimately, at the end of the day, 1 Gina is 1 Gina. You determine whether or not you want to roll here for her. Again, I do think the Creamhild pairing will include some considerations there. Voyager is another unit. I think I've talked about him, but again, he's 50% charging AoE quick foreigner. He did just get the NP upgrade with this. He can be pretty decent, but ultimately at the end of the day, I think a lot of people will compare him to the likes of like Kukulkan and other units at this point. So ask yourself whether or not he's your preferred choice for an AoE foreigner. Again, he can be nice in the fact that he can kind of do a little bit of party charge off the back end of his NP, depending on the traits of his allies. So it is something to consider that you might be able to like use him in place of a support if you just need a little bit of charge. But ultimately, he's not a unit that anyone really has to have. Yagyu is another interesting one. He's a single target Arts Saber. To me, Yagyu could still stand to get some upgrades. He has gotten one already. He needs more, if you ask me, because he is still somewhat kit-wise outpaced by some of his other contemporaries, especially Lancelot at this point. Lancelot doesn't really have the survivability. Yagyu at least has 1 turn of it. I do think Yagyu, though, pretty much loses in every other category other than maybe like actual crit damage at this point. But we'll see. I think at the end of the day, Yagyu can be a good serviceable single target saber for you, but ultimately your welfares are likely to be stronger unless you've heavily invested in him. There you go. You can see the banner duration is long, and you just have the 2 banners that are going to be here. Summoning campaign number 2 will include at least 1 rare unit here in Cleopatra. We have Ozzy and Nido Assassin as well. Ozzy is a very strong single target rider. I believe we talked about him with the Chaldea Boys event, but again, he has a party-wide buff success chance. So go check out what I said at the Chaldea Boys event. But again, he can be a very, very solid unit to roll for any account. Cleo is a unit that at least has had a buff. It has sort of helped her damage performance quite a bit, and again, allowing her to loop. So to me, Cleo is in a better spot. I don't think she's your best AoE assassin by any stretch of the imagination. She's AoE buster, but she can actually be really nice for challenge content as well. So don't look at her just for the farming aspect. Consider as well the sheer amount of healing, the sheer amount of like survivability that she has in that kit, and I do think she can be a solid serviceable option for you. Nitocris Assassin, oh boy, Nitocris Assassin could use some work. Actually, let me see if I remember here. I don't remember if they did buff Nito Assassin at all. I think they did, and I'm just struggling to remember what it was. Yes, it was the NP interlude. So they actually did give her the NP interlude. Again, she had major issues there, but they did actually basically buff up the damage, reduce the defense by 20% for 3 turns, skill seal, add waterside battlefield status, allowing her to kill, and then essentially moved the instant kill behind the damage of her NP. So it did actually help, because one of her biggest issues is basically both her and her caster version death procced before damage. The caster version really didn't care because it had 100% charge, but Nito Assassin was a refund based looper, so her death procking before damage went out really hurt her if it actually happened. Again, she needed all help that she could get to loop. So that buff did at least fix one of the biggest issues with her. I hope they actually do come back in and maybe buff her one more time, help out that refund a little bit, make her a little bit more consistent. And again, she can be at least a fun unit to use, especially from a tanking standpoint. She's very survivable, very capable of mitigating quite a bit of damage, but ultimately not too much there in terms of like actual raw damage output. Again, looking at the CEs that are available here, you got Refrain here. It is split stats and really nothing to write home about if you ask me. Smile Knight here is okay as well. Nothing I would really go after, and still in the middle of the trip as well. Another interesting one, but not anything that I would roll for. Okay. So that is the Wangina World Tour event, basically there in September. And then we had the Fate Samurai Remnant release campaign. Now, this is interesting because there's going to be a little bit of conjecture as to whether or not NA gets something like this. You can see we got the login commemorative craft essence for it. We also got some great and super success chance for the following servants, as well as half AP rank up quests. I think when you start to see stuff like this, I don't think they're necessarily going to skip it, but they are going to probably have to find some new way of like reintegrating it to NA. This does mean that this campaign is a candidate to like move somewhere else in the year, potentially earlier, if they feel the need to like fit it in at a time where it's more appropriate, maybe like a Samurai Remnant DLC coming out or some sort of announcement in relation to the series. So who knows what they do in that regard. So I'm going to say this campaign has the potential to be a little volatile as to when it occurs. But I do think you probably do get it or something like it. Again, you can also see they did limited interlude quests available. To me, this pretty much guarantees we will get this, but it does depend. Again, it doesn't mean we get it at the exact same time. Remember, whenever they make the interlude quests like this available, do them. Even if you don't have the unit, that's exactly why you want to do them, because you're going to get a lot of quartz and a lot of milestone completion sort of in addition to everything else if you actually do all of these things. So I highly recommend you do all of them that are available to you at the time. You also get a summoning campaign here, and you guys can see Musashi Saber is going to be in here. We have not talked about Musashi Saber yet, and she is a very strong single target saber. In fact, she has the strongest singular damage out of all the sabers, though she doesn't really have too much in the way of niches. She does have a niche against Moon Cancer and Alter Ego enemies, interestingly enough, but not like, you know, like, oh, hey, like Anti-Man or something like that. So in that regard, Musashi could still be just really, really strong. Her biggest issue, she doesn't have charge baked into her kit, but she does have quite a bit of good card performance, particularly due to her 5th form skill that allows her to double up the hit counts on her attacks, basically allowing her to generate even more refund with her cards. So that can be a thing. she can be basically soloed with due to that, or you could try to like card lock her cards into there in order to get the performance. Again, she is a very, very strong single target saber. I love using her. I don't think she's bad by any stretch of the imagination and can work well in both just general purpose boss killing as well as, again, like more challenge oriented content. Arjuna Archer at this point, I hate to say it, it really does feel like he's been somewhat forgotten by the devs. The devs have given him some upgrades. Almost none of them have really like helped out his situation. He still just feels lackluster in a lot of ways. He still feels like he fails to outshine his other Archer contemporaries. I really cannot stress not rolling him. I don't think he's that good of a pickup for anybody. But that being said, if you do already have him, or if you have multiple MP levels of him, he may actually still be your strongest option. So don't necessarily write him off as like some sort of unusable bad character. I'm just not advocating for you guys to roll for him for your like, hey, I really need an AoE archer. It's probably better to wait and try to get a different one than roll here for Arjuna. Li Shuan Assassin, another interesting one. He's story locked. He's single target arts. I do feel like he can be a decent option for you. He can deal solid damage. His biggest issue is that he's kind of one and done due to the durations of his skills. He doesn't have any charge baked into his kit. He does have a little bit of survivability, but he's mostly built off of crit damage and NP damage. So trying to get him back to another NP is going to be the biggest issue. But ultimately, at the end of the day, he can still be a really, really punishing single target assassin for you, especially if you can get those crits off. Cersei is a very serviceable single target caster. Basically has 100% charge. She's buster single target and has the ability to pigify enemies. Pigify is essentially a unique form of stun. It basically will turn the enemy into a pig. It does not work on all enemies, and it's kind of weird as to when it works. You wouldn't think it would work on any boss whatsoever, but there are some that it does. So it's just a very unique thing. When in doubt, look it up, see if your Cersei's effective. And again, you might be amazed at what she actually can turn into a pig. It only lasts for the duration of the turn, but again, it can be a really, really nice effect and does allow her to sort of limit the enemy's turn economy if she can manage to get it off. So again, Cersei could be a really, really usable single target caster that can actually do the job for you. Ku Lancer is, again, I don't think anyone's really going to roll devotedly for Ku Lancer here, but he is a cockroach. He is definitely the strongest single target Lancer of the 3-star variety in the game, and there are numerous reasons for that. But again, just his overall survivability and damage output is pretty nuts. Again, he is a very, very solid option if you're sort of needing a fill-in or working with 3 stars. Again, you guys could see the sorry, let me spend a little bit more time on this, but you guys could see the banner timings and pairings here. Again, Cersei basically with Musashi and also old man, as I like to call him, old man Stanley, but Li Shuan. And that's going to be your Samurai Remnant release campaign. Like I said, I'm not sure about the date here. This may move way forward in time, or maybe even backward. I don't know. Just understand that this is a campaign that the developers will pull out when they feel it's necessary to. All right, now we are in October. We get the Ordeal Call campaign part 3. Again, this is going to include some other nice lucrative rewards as well as quarter cost AP. And we're really trying to get people to complete story, get caught up, get into Ordeal Call, and sort of continue on. Again, they basically added permanent free and challenge quests during that time. And again, new class score missions as well. The summoning campaign includes Sigurd, who is another interesting unit. He is a single target version of Sumanai. He's basically an anti-dragon saber. His NP damage is actually one of his bigger issues, but a lot of people have a tendency to think that he's a bad unit because of it, when the guy actually has 100% crit damage and one of the highest attack powers of all sabers. So at that point, he really does do a metric ton of crit damage, and I think a lot of people overlook that aspect to him. His biggest issue to me, he doesn't really have a whole lot in the way of survivability. He does have some, but he also doesn't have charge, and I think that kind of at this point hurts him, since his NP damage is a little bit on the lower end. It does feel like charge would help him sort of be able to maybe fire off multiple NPs and sort of offset that issue for him. So maybe at some point they relook at him. I do think he has a very cool design, and he is a limited unit, so you do kind of have to roll for him if you want him. QSH is a very phenomenal sort of solo artist, as we like to call him. He's another cockroach, somebody that can be very hard to bring down, very hard to kill. And that does make him very good at defeating certain challenge fights and bosses. As again, he can sort of just sit there and loop his NP over and over and over again, making himself invincible. And as long as the enemy doesn't have buff strip or invuln pierce, he is basically going to get a free ride to just kind of keep messing with them and eventually kill them. So he can be a very, very fun unit to do solos with, or again, just an effective counter to certain challenge quests. I do really like him in that regard. His major gimmick is, again, getting good crits, but ultimately, at the end of the day, he is still a fun unit to use. Valkyries are, I think, a AoE Lancer that at this point still struggles a little bit. The Valkyries do really need an upgrade. They really haven't given it. Their assassin form is, to me, a much better, much more usable version of them. You can still AoE quick loop with them, and they do have cute designs. You basically get 3 Valkyries in one. But the issue to me is ultimately their gameplay performance could stand some upgrades. Their damage is pretty low at this point in comparison to several of the other Lancers that are out there. Consort you want to talk about low damage? Here's your girl. Quite literally the lowest attack power amongst all 4-star assassins. And so much so that she actually essentially has the lowest effective attack power out of all 4-star units, which is saying a lot. Thankfully, the devs have realized that she has some issues, and they have at least given her one buff that really did help her out. She's no longer the trophy wife. She's an AoE buster assassin. She definitely will not be used for damage output for you too much unless you just really, really like her and you've really invested in her. To me, outside of really liking the character, I don't really advise rolling her. I don't think she's going to be a very effective option, and almost every single one of your welfares would probably be a better pick over her, especially now that you have the Evocation Festival. Red hair, ironically enough, bears worth mentioning as a 3-star purely because he's story locked. However, he does not bear worth mentioning for any gameplay considerations. Red hair is in desperate need of upgrades. He really does struggle to really do anything effectively. To me, the developers have absolutely hung that unit out to dry, and they really do need to do better by him. All right, that is your Ordeal Call campaign for part 3. Again, I don't necessarily advise rolling here unless you just really have your eyes set on QSH or Sigurd, but the choice is yours. Again, it's difficult to tell you guys, like, hey, don't roll here. I think it's not necessarily a high-value banner, but it could be depending on how you view the units. All right, next up, Evocation Festival Part 5. And again, as we just mentioned, so you just had a banner for Consort U, and oh look, who's coming to the Welfare Festival? A much, much stronger AoE Buster Assassin as a Welfare. So guaranteed to get the 5 copies. Realistically speaking, the actual star of this, though, is Shiki Assassin. One of the game's best assassins for single target, if you ask me, and still a very, very highly sought after unit from the early days of FGO. She's single target arts, has invuln pierce, has 30% charge, and death procs. Again, don't expect necessarily to death proc bosses and stuff like that, but she is definitely a very usable unit. Her damage is pretty solid. It has had an NP interlude, even though she is a welfare. And again, the 30% charge as an arts unit is something that can be very solid for you. The Mecha Ellies, they're 2 different designs, but 2 completely same units. Don't sleep on them either. They are both single target alter egos, and they can actually be pretty effective boss killers. They don't have a whole lot in the way of charge, and their card performance is kind of ass, but ultimately, at the end of the day, their damage with their NP really can't be denied. It is fairly solid. So again, they could be a decent option for you to pick up if you need a single target alter ego. And Gray, as we already mentioned, Gray is a Buster looping, dear Lord, Buster looping, invuln piercing AoE berserker that has assassin that has AoE that has undead niche in her kit. So again, her damage is solid even without the undead niche. She can be brute force 3-turned in a double coin Sky setup, starting from 60% charge. You do get all the coins, so you can kind of make that happen. So again, you can start her with some interesting CEs. Maybe not necessarily something like Imaginary Element or something like that, but maybe even something like Battle Olympia or any other number of 60% charge Cs that give a little bit of a card type up or attack up or something like that. We did get, again, the upgrade here as well to Void Shiki's first skill. This is what actually turns her into a Black Grail Looper, and this is what really does allow her to surpass Muramasa. So this one's kind of a nutty thing, but as you guys can see, it gives her Invuln Pierce 3 turns now. Art's Performance 3 turns now, and again reduces all enemies instant kill resistance for 3 turns as well. So they really just allowed her to kind of become a looper in this regard. She already could loop in the sense that you could brute force 3-turner, but now she actually can touch Black Grail, and that is where her damage just really does take off. She is very refund based in the sense that she is a single hit AoE Arts Saber, so you really do kind of like care about how many enemies she hits, but only to the extent that she can get back to like even 10% refund, because you really are just going to try to like brute force her in order to get there. That being said, she actually with this buff basically can refund like 30% and stuff like that, so it is a really interesting buff in what it allows her to do. Cheeky Assassin again here basically just got an upgrade to her dodge skill. It just allowed her to now have a crit star bomb on it, so yeah, one of the stronger welfares getting even stronger is kind of funny, but yeah, I don't know why they chose to do these buffs, but dang, they're good. Your summoning campaign is going to be Void Shiki Saber. We already pretty much just talked about her right there. She actually does very solid damage as an AoE arts unit. Even though she only has a 1-hit NP, she can refund and Black Grail loop, which is kind of insane given where she started out from. And she can death proc. So in terms of like taking out like, you know, low health fodder waves, yeah, she might just be able to death proc her way through them. So she is a very interesting saber. I do think she can be a quality pickup for you, especially if you're looking for an arts AoE saber. But ultimately, at the end of the day, Muramasa kind of has her outclassed in brute force charge and really just kind of being the Swiss Army knife that he is. But still, I think like she does beat him in overall damage as long as the node allows for it. So again, up to you as to whether or not to roll. Reigns is sort of your upgrade of Waver. She is a 50% charging unit. At one point, she was meta. I wouldn't necessarily say she's the most meta unit now, but she is definitely a solid support to pick up, especially given the fact that she doesn't care what card type you are. So she can be very effective if you're in a single damage dealer type of comp, as outside of like Oberon and stuff like that, she's actually one of the more effective boosters for damage, given the fact that she has 40% attack up for 3 turns on top of the 50% charge that she has. So again, a very, very solid pickup in regards to her, and also interesting defensive kit. Osaka Behime, I don't really necessarily recommend going for. She is permanent. She has a very wonky kit. She could be a fun unit to do solos with. She has buff strip. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I feel like the kit's somewhat disjointed unless you're trying to sit here and do this like hybrid Buster Quick crit thing with her. So at the end of the day, it feels to me like Osaka Behime still, even despite the fact of all the upgrades she has gotten, could use even more upgrades. I really want to see them give Osaka Behime a little bit more identity rather than just, hey, I'm this solo unit that is a like interesting sort of peculiarity. I think they need to do a little bit better by Osaka Behime. I think she's a really fun character and a really like cool one that people would love to simp for if she did have a better gameplay aspect to her. Fujino is again a unit that a lot of people care for. She's a limited 4-star single target buster archer. Damage is actually pretty solid. Charge is probably her bigger issue. She does have the I believe it's either giant or super large niche. Either way, she can be a really effective unit against those types of enemies. A lot of people try to pick her up just due to her rareness. At one point, she was the rarest 4-star in all of FGO. She has since gotten a couple of banners, as I think the devs realized they were messing up with that due to the popularity of this unit. So this is a rare opportunity to roll for her, but she does get banners every now and then now. So if you're looking for coins for her, or again, you just want more NP levels of her, this is probably going to be a good time for you to try and pick her up. Liz Lancer, we've already talked about. She has that sadistic charisma that's really nice. And Hephaestion is going to be a very, very good single target pretender option for you. JP finally did get another single target pretender in Phantasm Moon, but she is still a ways away. And again, Hephaestion is permanent, so you can always get spooked by more of her. She is a 100% charging arts single target foreigner, and her major deal is the fact that obviously as a foreigner she is already effective against alter egos. She is also effective against berserkers. She is also effective against the entire like knight triangle, but then on top of that she's also effective against casters due to a unique passive that she gets. She actually has quite a bit of classes that she can be used against, and that is probably one of her best aspects in addition to the 100% charge. You can brute force 3 turn her from 0, so again, she can be a black grail looping unit as a single target for you. So again, a very solid pickup by any meaning of the word. And again, you guys can see the pairing here. You're going to have Fujino with Void Shiki, Liz with Osaka Behime, and Hephaestion with Reigns is definitely interesting pairings there. Again, sorry, there are rate up craft essences here. Grand Puppeteer can actually be a pretty interesting one as its art's up for 3 turns and starting battle at, I believe, at 60% at MLB, indeed. So it is somewhat rare in that regard. The bigger issue is that it is split stats, so you probably don't want to level it. Mature Gentleman is at least a very rare death resist craft essence, if you're worried about running into that. Wide Done It, altogether not that good of a combination of effects. Trigger Treatment, absolutely god tier art. All attack scaling, NP gain, and crit damage. Very good longevity CE there for maybe challenge fights that go on a long time. Vivid Dance of Fists, interesting. Mystic Eyes of Distortion has a demerit. Again, as you start to get down here, some of them altogether not too good. Repeat Magic is interesting, though, as a 3-star, because, again, it's all attack scaling. And you guys can see it's 30% starting charge and NP gen rate of 15%. So it is at least a rare charge combination there. But otherwise, nothing too much to write home about the rest of these Cs. Trigger Treatment, basically the best pickup there. All right, moving on. We have the 3,000 days anniversary in October, and this one's going to be interesting for you all because, as you guys can see, what's that? This is a 4-star ticket for you guys. So you do have a retweet campaign that will probably get on an A. You will get quartz from that. You'll also just get the 3,000 day login bonus regardless, as well as the login bonus campaign giving you teapots, apples, and a ticket. And then again, a limited time comeback login bonus for anyone that tries to start then or restart then. But the big deal is going to be the SR ticket. I will probably make an entire video for this. Just in general purposes, this can be used to pick up any number of units. And you guys can see there are a ton here to choose from. A lot of people have a tendency to either go for characters that they really like, maybe rarer, like story locked units, or again, potentially just trying to fill a hole in their account that they so desperately need filled. So there's any number of things that you guys can do here. Like I said, I'll end up putting out an entire video, but this could be something that you could plan into your rolls. Again, you can use this to get more coins for a unit. So choice is yours as to what your strategy wishes to be for this sort of thing. There's also going to be a mission list. You will get, again, some decent rewards here, but nothing too amazing other than maybe the 2 gold foes there. You have some other campaigns that's 2 times experience gained when leveling up the unit that you exchanged for, as well as damage bonus on the unit that you exchanged for. And again, you can see there, targeted servants will have 50% damage bonus on every quest, regardless of whether or not it's main story or event quest, which is interesting. Ember Gathering daily quest and Training Field daily quest will be open all day for a limited time, so they're not half cost, but they are all available. And then there will be a summoning campaign here that is, well, I'm just going to say an interesting one. Both of these are older units. Both of these are highly sought after units. Let's just go ahead and we'll start with Morgan Le Fay. Morgan Le Fay is definitely not going to be your top damage dealer for AoE Berserkers. There are a couple of units that do outpace her in that regard. Still has some pretty useful niches against obviously Man trait, and then Fairy or Round Table Knight can also be a niche that she can fulfill. Realistically speaking, Morgan Le Fay is very nice to have because, again, Man trait, she is super effective against that, which combined with Koyanskaya, who will logically be paired with her, does bring the power mod version of the Man attribute niche there. So again, multiplicative scaling for those two, making her just absolutely annihilate Man trait targets. And essentially you can see that from that alone you have good damage potential, but then she's also 50% charging on top of that and has overcharge on the back end of her NP, allowing her to sort of facilitate the sort of, I'm going to say, the better original form of the invincible / immortal comp. So again, she can be paired really effectively with obviously Buster units, but then maybe even the likes of like Merlin and Castoria as well to get into that immortal invincible comp, and she could really do some solid work. So she works extremely well, not only as a farmer, but also as a sort of challenge unit in that regard for clearing waves pretty effectively. And then we get to Artoria Caster, and good lord, I cannot say enough. If Oberon is the best damage amplifier in the entire game, Castoria is arguably the best party protector in the entire game. I do think there is some nuance to that, but essentially the way to understand this is basically Artoria Caster is one of, if not the strongest unit in the entire game. Usually a lot of people will ask me what units to roll for when they first start playing the game. Artoria Caster is just the essential like meta support. You don't have to have her, but by not having her, you will be making your game a little bit tougher on yourself. Artoria Caster can absolutely trivialize certain challenge content. If you're someone that enjoys that challenge, that's perfectly fine. You do not have to roll her. But if you're someone that is looking for that challenge content to be less of a challenge or downright easy in some circumstances, Artoria Caster can do that as well. Not only the fact that she does all of that and is a good challenge-oriented unit, but she's also just extremely good at facilitating party charge, looping, and just damage output for Art's units. So again, she is a sort of all-in-one package. She even works outside of Art's comps depending on what you're trying to do. So I really, really highly recommend picking up Artoria Caster if you haven't already. I just, again, can't say enough about her, but I will have to stop there so that I don't end up taking up the whole video talking about her. Again, she is a meta support. She is a very, very strong pickup. Here you guys can see the banner rotation will actually start with Morgan and then go into Castoria. But yes, this is going to be a very lucrative celebration. And again, it's because it's 3,000 days of FGO. So obviously you have all those login rewards. You have those missions that are available to you. And again, the SR selector on top of really, really solid banners here. Keep in mind, this will happen basically about a month earlier for NA, so expect this not in October, but instead September. And the reason why will be because, again, the NA server started about a month earlier in the year than the JP server did. Usually why these things have a little bit of a shift on the NA side of things. We did get a pre-release campaign for what they were calling Grail Front 4, which is kind of hilarious because it was a full-fledged event. It was the White Castle by day, Black Castle by night event. You can see there was a login bonus for this, some, again, missions that gave you some courts, some other campaigns here that basically, as you can see, 0 AP for all main story quests from Arc 1 until Arc 2 Lost Belt 1. And then again, it will override as well any quarter cost campaign that was out. So really, really interesting there. Ember Gathering and Training quests are open all day as well, and have the extended duration there. And basically, event-related servant strengthening quests are half AP. Same thing with their interlude campaigns. And you did also get an FP bonus basically for each one of these units as well. These were your event units that they were trying to show you. But again, that just was what it was. And then they had a live stream to actually like debut the event. And keep in mind, you will maybe have a little bit of a shift on this, as this will be happening towards the end of October. And we may see maybe just a slight forward shift at this point due to the existence of probably a Thanksgiving banner for NA. But ultimately, at this point, our schedule usually gets pretty close to the way JP had it. So we'll just have to see what they do and how they handle schedule on the back end, maybe a little bit of padding. Now, talking about the Grail Front event, this actually is a event where Grail Fronts are pretty much center stage. There are a ton of them here. So if you really like the Grail Fronts, you will really like this event. If you really don't like the Grail Fronts, you really won't like this event. The story here is actually pretty good from what I've told, so maybe those of you guys that don't like the Grail Fronts can at least sort of hinge on that. But again, this will be a very interesting one just due to the mechanics. Basically, if you've never done a Grail Front before, there are going to be all sorts of things to do, but it's sort of like playing a top-down version of a Grail War, rather than having just, like you going in and fighting one battle. It's going to be instead you fighting a series of battles with each of your servants, depending on how you maneuver them around the map. So it is an interesting mechanic nonetheless. Taking a look at the summoning campaigns here, we first have Ptolemy, as well as a new 3-star unit here, paired alongside Penth. Let's basically talk about the CEs and Penth first, which you guys can see. Bibliophilia here is going to be your 5-star CE. It is an interesting one. It's MP damage and overcharge, as well as charge per turn, but it is split stat there. Day and Night is again going to have some buff removal resistance, but ultimately not enough to really make a difference there. And your adventure at least has some survivability built into it. Penth is going to be an interesting single target berserker for a lot of y'all. She has very decent card performance and pretty solid NP damage, especially against Greek males, which is her major niche. She has a 100% power modifier against Greek males, so she just absolutely destroys them. She has 20% charge per turn and debuff immunity, but otherwise no survivability whatsoever, so that is always her biggest issue. She is very much the epitome of a glass cannon, kill or be killed with regards to how her kit works. Sugitani is going to be another interesting one. She is a permanent addition to the 3-star roster, but she will not be added until after the, again, banner concludes. So at that point, then she will go into the normal pool and you will be able to roll her with just normal FP. Again, you can see there, attack stat altogether, not too great, but she is a 3-star, so keep that in mind. She's a Buster single target archer with 2 Buster cards in the deck. She basically has Buster performance for 3 turns, critical damage of Buster cards by 50% for 3 turns. Her second skill here is a Disengage that removes her own debuffs and grants herself regeneration for 5 turns. Again, it is at least nice here in the fact that it has the cleanse, and then it's going to increase her own critical damage 1 time for 5 turns, every turn for 5 turns, as well as gaining critical stars every turn for 3 turns. And you can see the crit damage buff there is 50% at a maximum rank. So again, definitely interesting, as well as the 10 crit stars there to facilitate things. But Sugitani has had a buff already on JP. And again, you guys can see her kit just kind of is what it is. She grants herself evasion 3 attacks 3 turns, increases her own critical star absorption of Buster cards for 3 turns, and then again will give herself a regeneration buff that increases her own buff success rate by 15% for 5 turns, every turn for 3 turns. Yeah, it's kind of a mouthful. Anyways, the idea behind it is, as you guys can see, she originally had an NP that didn't have everything having a guaranteed effect. So you getting that buff success chance scaling up over time is going to lead to her being more consistent with her NP. But basically, they gave her the upgrade at that point to give her a chance to ignore evasion at 85%, as well as, again, the chance to increase her own NP damage still being at 20% there, with her damage getting increased, and then adding the anti-sovereign, aka anti-king super effective modifier, as well as a 20 crit star bomb. The way that it used to be, and the way that NA will first encounter it, is pretty much all the same there, only she has a 500% chance to remove her own buff success rate buffs after the NP. So basically, if you manage to secure these buffs, you would at least get that benefit, but then it would immediately remove the buff success chance, so any sort of follow-up NP would just be kind of hot garbage, because again, you would have the chance to miss those buffs. Now, no longer does it have that demerit, so you won't have to worry about it getting removed. But again, this buff is a fairly recent one on JP. You can also see even her overcharge has chance-based occurrences, with again, Arts and Buster up for one turn of 20%. I'm not really sure why they did this. Someone should have told them RNG is not fun in that regard. Thankfully, it is at least something where they gave her the ability to solve this issue within her own kit. So to me, the NP interlude was necessary and definitely helped out in terms of both damage performance against other 3-stars, as well as making that NP actually deal consistent damage, rather than being like, oh no, I missed the NP damage up and now I do crap damage. So again, I do think it was a good buff for her, but I do think she needed it as well. And to me, they just probably never should have launched her in that state to begin with. Ptolemy is going to be your other new unit. He's going to be the 5-star for the event. And Ptolemy's a really interesting one. He is very similar to Melisson. That is to say, he has the ability to switch which NP type he is. So again, you can see here, Ptolemy starts out with 12k attack, at least decent and respectable attack power there. HP a little bit more on the anemic side. Only 0.43 NP gain there. And again, double Buster, double Arts, which is significant because he is both a Buster and an Arts NP unit. So taking a look at his active skills here, you can see he increases the party's attack for 3 turns by 20%, recovers the party's HP every turn for 3 turns by 1,000, and gains critical stars every turn for 3 turns by 15. His second skill here will increase the party's attack and Buster performance for 3 turns by 20% each, and again, party critical attack chance resistance for 3 turns by 20%. He will also charge his own NP gauge by 50. So fairly interesting right there. He has a good solid charge amount. Again, his bigger issue here would be the 7-turn cooldown, but remember you have things like the 5th of Pen, so there is that. Then his third skill here, as you guys can see, in stages 1 and 2, he will have a 500% chance to transform himself into stage 3. It will charge his own gauge by an additional 30%. Now he's become an 80% charger, and increase his own NP damage for 3 turns by 30%. In stage 3, however, unlike Melisson, he will have a 500% chance to transform himself back into stage 1. So whenever you use this skill, it will change which type of NP he is. That is an interesting mechanic, but it's also a dangerous mechanic. Don't press this skill unless you mean to, because you will end up bricking your run potentially if you do that. Again, he will increase his own NP generation rate for 3 turns and critical damage for 3 turns, as well as critical star absorption for 3 turns. Again, you guys can see the amounts here, and gain critical stars as a bomb there. What's interesting is basically stages 1 and 2, he will increase his own NP gauge and NP damage as he moves into his Arts AoE form. When he's in stage 3, he will go back into his Buster single target form, but then gain NP generation, critical damage, and critical star absorption, as well as crit stars. To me, these effects are almost reversed, and Ptolemy would be a lot more synergistic if they were, but I think that's kind of why they did it, just out of fear of making Ptolemy too strong. So really, again, you would probably want the NP gen on his Arts form and the NP damage on his Buster form, but it is what it is. Either way, he can definitely be used effectively. So it is an interesting way that they chose to handle it. He does have territory creation to at least boost his arts form, and he does have Saint Graph data preservation, which is interesting as it gives buff removal resistance. His NP in stages 1 and 2 again is single target buster of 5 hits. It's going to ignore defense for 1 turn. It's going to deal damage to 1 enemy, and then after the damage goes out, reduce their defense further by 20% for 3 turns. And his overcharge effect will increase his own NP damage for 1 turn of 20% there. His stage 3 is his AoE arts of 5 hits and will allow him to evasion pierce here, as well as deal damage to all enemies and then further reduce their defense by 20% after. He is then going to, with the overcharge effect in the same way, increase his NP damage for 1 turn by 20%. It means that he's synergistic with Oberon in both of his forms, but naturally his Buster single target form will be the most synergistic. Still, it is very interesting in the sense that, like, he basically has the capacity to be a single target Buster Archer with 50% charge and defense ignore, or an AoE Arts Archer that has a decent amount of NP damage baked in should you want to boost it with Oberon. This does allow him, again, some interesting capacity, and given the fact that unlike Melisson, he can actually switch back and forth, there is some interesting potential for longer fights with more like challenge-oriented implications. So I do feel like this is a interesting and strong unit. Ptolemy has been a somewhat useful unit after his release at this point. He may not be on everyone's checklist of gotta roll, but he is definitely a strong archer and somebody that you guys probably should look at as to whether or not you think that could be something you could, again, use or would be helpful to you. Again, the choice is yours as to whether or not to roll, though, and you may have other priorities in the year, including other archers like, say, Durga. So, again, up to you, but Ptolemy is a very interesting and solid unit. Now, taking a look at the second summoning campaign here, you guys can see we have the return of Taigong Wang. I don't believe we've talked about Wang at this point in time. He is a permanent AoE quick writer. He has anti-demonic niche, and again, basically has 50% charge for himself, but party charge of 20%, attack up for the party, quick up for the party, and NP damage up for the party. So he actually does quite a bit of buffing as sort of a hybrid support, hybrid AoE damage character. So again, I do think he can be a decent pickup for you guys. There's actually quite a bit of stuff he is capable of, including just taking out a wave and setting someone else up. So I do actually really like Taigong Wang's kit. And again, his damage is fairly decent for an AoE quick writer. Theseus is, however, going to be another new unit. That's right, we got 2 new 3-stars in one event. We're getting spoiled by the devs. So again, Theseus is going to be a single target arts saber, which is interesting for him being 3-star. His attack power is again about in the 7k range. It's not too great, but it's not too bad either. And again, he's Earth attribute with a 0.55 NP charge rate. You can see his arts performance is 3 turns of 30%. He charges his own NP gauge by 20%, and he gains critical stars every turn for 3 turns. His second skill here increases the critical star absorption of arts cards for 3 turns, critical damage of arts cards for 3 turns by 50%, and gains more crit stars. And his third skill increases his own attack for 3 turns, reduces one enemy's attack for 3 turns. Again, the attack up for him is 30%, the attack reduction for the enemy is 20%, and then gains more crit stars. So you can see crit stars every turn, crit bomb, crit bomb. So again, he is a very crit-oriented Arts Saber, which does make him pretty serviceable as a 3-star. His NP, as we mentioned before, is 4-hit Arts single target. It's going to deal damage against demonic beast servant enemies by 50% for 1 turn. So this is a power mod that would affect cards after his NP as well. It'll deal damage to 1 enemy, and then deal super effective damage if they are a giant, and then also gain 20 crit stars. So again, you can kind of sit there just looping with Theseus, generating crit stars on his own. So he's kind of a little bit nutty as far as arts units go. The NP damage will be a little bit suspect with him as a 3-star, but again, he is quite serviceable. And if that wasn't enough, His overcharge effect is a 3-turn stacking critical damage modifier of 50%. So again, crits, 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 crits. You can see he can do quite a bit of damage and quite a bit of capacity even as a 3-star. So again, very fun unit to use, very interesting one as far as I've used him. Again, not together the strongest, most powerful saber, but for a 3-star, a pretty synergistic and well-designed kit. And again, he is permanent. It's the same deal as Sugitani. After this banner is over, he will go and get added into the pool, but the banner has to end first. And then there's Nezha here. Nezha is an interesting AoE Buster Lancer. I'm going to say, to me, Nezha is not altogether that strong. There are other better options than Nezha, but Nezha does at least have 20% charge, so you could use them effectively as a wave clearer, if nothing else. Again, the same CEs on raid up there, and then we go into Summoning Campaign 3. As you guys can see, this is the return of Iskandar and basically Waver. Now, we already talked about Waver back during the Chaldea Boys event, but Iskandar is another interesting unit. And again, just checking through here, you guys can see they did finally add charge to my boy, again, on a 5-turn cooldown of 30%. So Iskandar is in a much better place than he used to be. This really does help him pop off. This really brings him back into the discussion. And Iskandar has always been one of the stronger sort of rider NPs in the game. That was never really up for doubt. He has all 3 types of buff, including NP damage up, attack up, and card type up in his kit. So he definitely scales quite well. The issue has always been that he never had charge, so he never really had the capacity to actually be able to be included in a 3-turn, and really did struggle potentially to get back to his NP. In fact, he's one of the only units in the entire game that they have ever come in after the fact and actually given him a actual raw stat upgrade. As you can see, they buffed his overall NP charge attack rate to 0.86. That's how badly he needed it, because again, he was really struggling to get back to an NP. But altogether, damage has never been his issue. So now that he's a lot more automatable and 3-turnable, yes, Iskandar is absolutely a monster and a good pickup. But again, you may have other AoE riders, including other welfares or units like Khadroth, that you just really feel like you're confident that you don't need him in. Again, he's not a unit that you have to have, and there will be other riders out there that are interesting, including Tai Gong Wang in the prior banner. Again, you can see Theseus and Sugitani are both here, and then Waver included. This is at least an interesting banner. Same sort of craft essences, but it is what it is. They actually didn't give us a banner schedule for this one, but I can assure you that they are not on raid up in the exact same banner. FGO doesn't really do that anymore, which is kind of funny with its SSRs. That is why you have so many banners that I end up having to review. All right, so that is going to be the Grail Front event. And basically, we have November here. Hey guys, continuing on with our banner review again. We last left off here in November. And basically, we finished by talking about the Grail Front event that was going to be there at the end of October. Essentially, now here we will be going into the Ordeal Call campaign part 4. So there's going to be some interesting stuff here. Again, you're going to get more stuff added to the actual like Bleached Earth area. Again, new free quests and challenge quests are going to keep coming out. Again, just to kind of mention this, but as a more generalistic stance on the Bleached Earth and Stormpod quests, over time, you'll notice that there are like certain free quests that are available to you. Some of them are better than others. Some of them you're just going to like want to hyper fixate, and others you're just going to want to like completely ignore. As a result, this does mean that if you're like constantly using your storm pods, especially if you get them when they first come out, that you are very much going to just keep like hopping from new campaign to new campaign in that regard. So like each time they come out with new free quests, it's going to be like, oh, okay, now I need to find the free quest I actually want to do from this group. Because again, you're going to sit there and you're going to be like, oh, wow, I'm actually getting so many materials from these nodes that I'm actually killing off some of the materials that I need. Which is a good thing, at least from the player perspective, not necessarily from the dev perspective. But again, it's something to pay attention to, and so each one of these campaigns is going to have a new batch of them to watch out for. Again, there will also be challenge quests that'll be released, and some of them can be really, really nice. You guys can see there are some limited time master missions attached to it, including more teapots and more of the ever necessary stardust for the class score system. And then again, limited campaign master missions as well that just involve you guys clearing basically Ordeal Call. Again, more quartz given out for that. You're also going to get half cost, again, Bleached Earth, but Storm Pod nodes basically, which is really a nice thing. Again, just mentioning this. This is something where now on JP, we actually get half cost every time that we have an event, because a lot of people didn't like having to do their storm pods during events. I'm going to tell you, if you're concerned about that, you can still complete all the events on Nat AP and still use your storm pods usually completely without wasting any of them. However, you do need to be a little bit smart, and I'm going to say that because you are capped out on, again, 3 storm pods a day, but a total of 9 that you can ever hold at any given time, gives you 3 days buffer room. So usually in the last like 2 to 3 days of an event, if you stop doing your storm pod nodes during that time and focus on finishing the event instead with all of your AP, that ends up saving you a little bit. So you want to go into an event without any storm pods available. You want to complete the event pretty much at max storm pods and then make sure you get them spent down before you would miss any of them. But that'll get you the most AP efficiency in the time that you are allotted. So that's usually how I managed to do it on JP. Again, I did them all on Nat AP. Sometimes I had to get a little bit creative, maybe taking longer than 3 turns in certain event nodes, but it is the way it is. And so again, this is why the devs made this a more permanent thing. But you can see this will just be for just this duration at this point in time. It's not a permanent thing yet as of here. So it is what it is. And then Arc 1 and Arc 2 main quests are going to be quarter AP. You're going to get some more Spirit Vein Stones added to the Da Vinci shop. And that's basically all it is. Now, on top of this, though, we get a summoning campaign, including Arjuna Altar. I believe I did already talk about him earlier in the year, but again, just a brief aside here. He is a very, very good AoE Buster Berserker. 30% charge. He can work in a double coin sky setup, be made to 3 turn from a 50% starting charge standpoint. He deals a crap ton of damage due to his ability to debuff enemies and then deal more damage to any enemy that is debuffed. And so again, he's a very, very strong AoE Berserker. There are going to be other units that kind of come out that challenge him and other units that do obviously get upgrades. So again, it's up to you to determine if he's the one you want to roll, but he can be a good pickup depending on your account. Junako, on the other hand, is a permanent unit. I believe I did talk about her at Valentine's Day, but just in the chance that I didn't and my memory is failing me, she is at least a unit that is, at this point in time, made a little bit of a niche for herself. I do think that she's a lot better than she used to be, but she still kind of, to me, has a little bit of a weird sort of usefulness in the sense that I don't really see much point in taking her unless I am playing into the niche that she has. And so as a result, I do feel like Junako's biggest sort of asset, and the big thing that the devs were always going for with her, was simply making her a permanent Moon Cancer option. Again, there are other ways to get a Moon Cancer, including from the Evocation Festival, so it is what it is. If you just desperately need one, the welfares are probably the way to go, but Junako can still be useful to you depending on the compositions you want to run her in, even though she doesn't necessarily strike you as maybe like a master of any particular trade. So again, she can be a serviceable unit at this point. Lakshmi, still a really interesting saber. She can now loop a little bit better thanks to her upgrades, and it is a good thing that she has it, but she also has buff success chance built into her kit, probably something that a lot of people forget, as well as a targetable heal and invuln, which I do believe can be nice as a like clutch thing. If you're worried about things happening, you could always try to put like a taunt C on her, have her give somebody else the invuln, and then kind of have her soak the damage and go down, but maybe distract for somebody else or kind of help keep them alive by wasting a boss's actions. So it is a really interesting way to handle her, but again, she could be a decent farming saber for you or a decent challenge saber. It's totally up to you for how to use her. Asclepius is story locked. This is definitely a issue with him, as a lot of people really like him. He is a very fantastic unit, and he actually recently got a buff on JP that turned him partially into an arts unit, which is not to say that he didn't have an arts kit already, but realistically speaking, he didn't ascribe to any one particular card type as a support, whereas now he actually does do a little bit more for arts due to that upgrade. Still, it did address one of his major issues. I do think Asclepius is a unit that pretty much every account should probably try to get at least one copy of, because he is a very strong 3-star support, and so he can be a decent option for you, but I don't necessarily recommend rolling explicitly for Asclepius. Try to get him on a banner that you maybe want to roll otherwise. And William Tell is a permanent 3-star. Don't really need to say too much about him. He's an older unit, but again, I do think he's at least a decent single target arts archer. Maybe not my go-to or my favorite, but he is a decent option nonetheless. And as you guys can see, we also have the family portrait there. It is the LB4 commemorative craft essence. So if you want more copies of it, that could be a decent option for how to get it. Okay, so right here, looking at the event list here, now you can see we go into the 29 million downloads campaign featuring Medicine. We're going to get another login bonus here, another workshop Mana Prism Exchange update, which is just going to, again, re-release all of these basically into the shop again on top of your normal monthly ones that you purchase. And then same thing with the rare prisms as well. We're also going to permanently be getting Beyond the Night Without the Snow Flower. This one's going to be all HP scaling with friend points gained when using a friend support by 5 and bond point gain by basically 5% at MLB with 25 on the FP there when it is MLB. So, you know, I get a lot of questions about these. Are these like good to buy? For me personally, I do believe this set is actually pretty decent because, again, it's just giving you 5% of the base of whatever it is that you maybe want, like Bond or QP, depending on what is on the craft essence. And then the 25 FP can actually just be an okay thing for like, hey, I just want more FP over time. I'm going to say at the end of the day, some of the more recent ones that have come out, at least so far this year, the pattern JP's on has been better, but the ones that start coming out after this subset are very, very mixed stats. You start ending up with like 2.5% and stuff on a lot of them. And to me, those are not really worth. I don't feel like I've really ever used them or that like anybody really should bother purchasing them. But it can definitely be a thing if you don't have other options. But I'll certainly talk about that in the Rare Prism Shop Guide and Mana Prism Shop Guides. Taking a look at the fifth thing here, you guys can see it's the Recollect Essence update. So again, this is going to add new craft essences that you'll be able to purchase permanently in the shop. They had already started this in one of the prior download campaigns. And you guys can see this is going to be the return of Holy Night Supper. Is absolutely a phenomenal one, as well as, again, Holy Maiden leading Chaldea, which can actually be pretty decent. And even something like his rightful place also can be due to the fact that it has starting charge. So depending on what you're going after here, I'm going to say, again, Holy Night Supper, basically your better one out of all of these, but definitely some interesting ones to kind of think about grabbing if you have the spare mana prisms. It's also going to be daily missions, again, giving you a lot of faux pas prints, which is definitely good because you absolutely need more faux pas prints due to the fact that the rate they are given out is rather abysmal. And then you guys can see that we do get a game update here, basically talking about the update for those Recollect craft essences. And then a support selection new sorting feature here, basically allowing you to have craft essence priority whenever you sort for your friend supports and stuff like that. It's not going to be like, hey, I just want like black grails, but you can prioritize certain things like, again, QP up, Mystic Code up, Master Experience up. So that sort of thing is really nice. It will prioritize them and move them more towards the top. I really, really like that feature. I think it's a good thing. I can't wait for this sort of thing to come to NA. And then the summoning campaign, I don't remember if I've talked about Melisande, so we'll briefly talk about her here real fast. But again, Melisande, just pretty much still to this date, I do expect it might get challenged this year, maybe with some sort of upgrades that might come out. But Melisande is pretty much the unit that a lot of people, when they talk about Lancers and they say, like, you know, what Lancer should I roll? Melisande is pretty much going to be the first name off of everyone's lips. The reason why is because she is a god tier AoE Lancer at this point. She absolutely works from 0% starting charge, so she's able to touch Black Grail. She works really synergistically with Double Koyanskaya and Oberon, and so she really can do a ton of damage, especially with her stacking overcharge. She also can change her NP type, again, or basically her base NP form is actually a single target Lancer form where she is arts, and so that is also pretty serviceable since it keeps stacking NP gain every time you NP, allowing for easier and easier looping as a single target. So she is a unit that a lot of people tell people to roll for just from a bang for your buck standpoint, as it really ends up being again a good quality pickup for, you know, budget compositions, as she just really can do a whole lot of heavy lifting for any of your Lancer needs. So in that regard, I do think that Melisande still to date probably one of the best pickups as a Lancer. It's really difficult to try to really stump for anybody else other than her at the current point in time. We'll see what the devs do with that in the future, but again, as of right now, Melisande pretty much the king of the Lancers. And then we have Barkest over here as a story-locked 4-star AoE Buster Saber. Now, Barkest does have a deficiency compared to Gawain and Gareth Saber, but that deficiency is purely that she can't bring Sunlight Battlefield on her own, and that is not that big of a deal because everything else that Gareth does is just phenomenal. Her damage is arguably her worst part, and that is partially the reason is that Sunlight Battlefield. If you bring somebody else like a Gawain or a Summer Gareth to change the battlefield for her, that can easily help. Or you could bring maybe another support that can just do it on their own that isn't one of the other sabers. So that is a thing. Again, Barkest, though, just a quality kit for being able to kind of stand around and out heal enemies and still be able to take them down and still be able to buff strip them and still be able to deal AoE damage. So there's quite a bit of good stuff going on in Barkest's kit. Highly recommend picking up at least one copy just because she's a very fun unit to play with, if nothing else. But again, she could be a really solid challenge saber for you, if not necessarily the best AoE damage outright. Looking at the rate up craft essences here, your 5-star, honestly, it's an interesting one in the fact that it's got arts and crit damage up and overcharge. It's split stats though, and it basically doesn't have any starting charge. So to me, not necessarily the biggest of deals. I could see this being okay, but remember this portion of the craft essence is only going to work the one time. So once you NP with it just once, really it pretty much goes down to just these two effects being the ones that you'll be dealing with. Again, there'll be new craft essences here, sort of replacements for old ones. You can see you do have arts up here and critical damage against humanoids and NP gen, and then increasing healing received. So each one of these could be a decent option compared to their older counterpart. Taking a look, next up here, we have the Evocation Festival Part 6. And again, this is going to be the return of basically your good old girl Cha-Cha here, as well as Sakamoto Ryoma and Nightingale. Santa. So each one of these welfares is a pretty interesting one, I would say, in the sense that I think basically each one has a little bit of an issue. So first, before we talk about them, let's take a look. You guys can see Cha-Cha actually does get a strengthening. This does help Cha-Cha. However, it's not enough to really make Cha-Cha like stand out too much. This just brings Cha-Cha up to like usable status. Prior to this point, prior to this strengthening, Cha-Cha was, I hate to say it, so bad that you were pretty much better to use quite literally every other berserker besides her. So at this point, I'm very happy to see them actually give this to her. She could still use some more. But again, this does at least make her a decent option as an AoE berserker, especially given her being Buster. So that's really all I need to say about Cha-Cha in that regard. Sakamoto Ryoma gets his NP interlude here. It definitely helps out because, again, his biggest issue was basically that he also lacked damage output. He's a little bit more on the supportive side as an arts single target writer. He does do some nice stuff for the party, buffing their arts up and everything. So in that regard, Sakamoto did have some uses, especially given the fact that he does have charge. But the damage was always his biggest issue, so him getting the NP interlude definitely helped him out. You can see they also have some new permanent missions added here just for completing story to get Evocation Festival leaves, for buying the parts for each of the welfares. And then honestly, the best in this entire list is actually Nightingale Santa. She's not necessarily going to be your best looper or anything like that, but the real reason you're going to be using her is for more challenge content. Again, her kit is a little bit more supportive centered. She could definitely still take out a wave for you, but ultimately she's designed to kind of help somebody else stay alive and kind of keep the ball rolling. So in that regard, I do think she's a solid pickup, especially for a more free-to-play oriented account. It does give them options, so I think she's a very, very good unit to pick up from this list. And then taking a look at the summoning campaign, oh boy, is it a doozy, because we actually get the return of Mao Nobu. So again, I don't remember if I've talked about Mao Nobu already or not, but Mao Nobu is a pretty interesting case, as when she first came out, a lot of people were not very high on that horse. A lot of people were thinking that she was one of the worst SSRs in the game, which I disagree with. I don't think she was that bad as people made her out to be. But I am going to say that she definitely needed some work and had some disjointedness in her kit. Now, though, she's received multiple buffs, and she basically ends up being the hardest hitting AoE Buster Avenger in that regard, and even harder than some of the others, like, Space Ishtar and stuff, assuming that she's, in her niches and everything like that going off. So I do believe that Mao Nobu is a classic example of, again, just like not judging the book by its cover and kind of waiting, because she did have at least the fundamentals of a pretty decent kit, and they have since buffed the ever-loving crap out of her, and man, is she strong now at this point. So again, she's a 30% charging unit that works in a double Korean Sky setup nowadays. She has quite a bit of niches, anti-divine, anti-sky, so stuff that can even overlap with itself. So she can really do some solid damage numbers. Taking a look here, we have Sakamoto Ryoma as the other AoE Lancer here. Again, nothing too much to write home about. He's a 50% charging AoE Lancer. His damage is respectable, but it's nothing too much, again. And he can be a decent option for your AoE Lancer. However, I'm going to say a lot of people probably are just going to go with a better Lancer than him. I do think he is a decent option, but ultimately where I've found use for him is actually due to the fact that he gives party-wide overcharge, so that can be useful for things like an invincible comp situation and stuff like that. Again, you have OG Nightingale here. I believe I already talked about her back with Valentine's Day, so I don't need to talk about her again here. Nobu Berserker is an interesting 4-star single target anti-divine. Not really got a whole lot in the way of survivability, though. She does at least have a singular turn dodge, so that is something that's pretty nice. But after that point, oh boy, watch out. She's a very glass cannon Berserker. Okada Izo is a fan favorite. He is a interesting 3-star, especially given the fact that he is limited. So he's one of the very rare limited 3-stars. He's anti-humanoid, he's arts, he's single target. Again, he has some really interesting costumes, and a lot of the ladies like him. So up to you to determine if you want to go after him. But I will tell you, just be careful. 3-star limiteds can definitely hurt you for trying to get copies or coins. And then Nursery Crime here, aka the book, is basically an interesting AoE arts caster. She's never really been top dog for damage. She has gotten some upgrades that have helped her over the years, but ultimately, to me, she's still a little bit more in the like medium damage output. Works as sort of a like AoE that can loop and stall by draining enemies, but otherwise, I don't really use her too often because, again, I have harder hitting AoE casters than her. Here's your banner timings. You guys can see the pairings there. Izo's going to be paired with Sakamoto Ryoma. And again, Nursery Rhyme with Nightingale there. So pretty interesting pairings. If you're a Nobu fan, you can go for the double Nobus. and that is going to be Evocation Festival 6. Now we move on to GudaGuda Super Goryaku. Or Goryokaku, sorry. I butchered that. This one's going to be another interesting one. This is the GudaGuda event, and it basically is going to have a new welfare involved with it, as well as a new SSR. So real quick here, kind of looking through, again, you guys can see these are all of your new units. Quite a bit of stuff to review here. We're going to go over each one of them for you. So I'm just going to go ahead and open each one of them. And again, your event cards, your craft essences from the actual event, as well as your login bonus. And again, here, just to show you some of the other ones here. I'm not going to bother wasting time really going over each of them, because I'll end up doing that when I do an actual event review. And then Hijikata is actually going to get a strengthening here. It's a rather good one, because as you guys can see, this does actually give him charge. This helps make him a lot more usable now. So to me, a much better upgrade for Hijikata. And really all of Hijikata, he's kind of come a long way from being a pretty like mid berserker to now he's like, all of his upgrades have been on point. Now he's a much more usable option for people. But essentially here, let's go look at the summoning campaigns. You guys can see there are 4 different ones. Before we start that, there is also a friend point campaign here. This is the return of Nobukatsu. So if you guys roll during the time period of the event, not only do you have the ability to roll out these craft essence fodder CEs that can actually help you with leveling other craft essences, but you also have Oda Nobukatsu you can get copies and coins for. So it's actually a really good time to gain coins for things like Grail casting, especially once you get all of his needs met. Just remember, you do have a 4th and a 5th append coming, so that may be something to consider whenever you roll this sort of thing out. Looking at banner number 1 here, we have Takeda Shingen, who is going to be our newest SSR coming in here, as well as Nagakura Shinpachi. So taking a look real fast at Shingen. Shingen's another interesting one in the fact that he is an AoE writer. And again, he is a very buster-centric writer, if you couldn't tell from the deck. Again, he's actually not got that much in the way of attack, but it's not a huge concern. The biggest issue is that a lot of the other writers at this point in time have had a ton of upgrades. You can see his first skill actually is party-wide attack for 3 turns with cooldown reduction. And this is actually a super important thing, because when we start adding the 5th append, you start to realize that this 6 turns becomes now 4 turns, basically, which is going to allow for a lot of interesting applications. The second skill here is going to be Buster Up for 3 turns of 30%, Charge of 50%, and Stars of 20. Now, due to this, and again, it being on a 6-turn cooldown, the 50% charge here with all of those cooldown reductions means that he is actually a unit that can work from a Black Grail starting point. Unlike, again, most of his other 50% charging contemporary peers, he's very similar to Arish Lancer in that regard, where basically the addition of the 5th append allowed them a much better starting point, which did definitely improve his damage output and gameplay. So I think he's a unit that probably a lot of people didn't roll for too much on the JP side of things for various reasons. And then now I think NA is going to get the benefit of foresight and kind of being able to see how JP has gone with that. So it is a thing where he could be a very decent pickup for you guys for AoE Rider. His third skill is also self-invincibility, 3 attacks, 3 turns, damage taken for 3 turns, and NP gen for 3 turns here by 30%. So again, nothing too crazy, but he does have hard survivability built in there as well. Taking a look at his NP, it's 8-hit AoE Buster, seals all enemies' NPs for 1 turn, activating first, then deals damage to them. And again, NP seal can be really nice, especially if you're expecting the enemy to like instant NP after a break bar or something like that. As long as they don't have a cleanse or some sort of debuff immunity, it can really help stop them. Overcharge effects here can, again, also be good. As you can see, he gets a tricolor buff, each one of them activating before the NP properly goes off, 20% each. So again, I don't think he's a very bad unit. I think he's pretty serviceable, but the biggest issue is that a lot of his competition has upgrades. That being said, the 5th append coming into the game, turning him into a Black Grail Looper, has definitely helped out those numbers. So he probably needs to be looked at under a microscope a little bit longer by the devs as to whether or not they feel like they need to buff him. Chimpachi is going to be your 4-star. He's, again, another interesting one. He's single target buster, basically. But as you guys can see, he's also got the gorilla deck. His attack stat, A-OK here at 10k for a 4-star. HP, maybe a little bit more concerning. Look at the active skills. You can see he increases his own burst performance for 3 turns, grants himself a buff on defense for 3 turns so that whenever he takes an attack, he will gain 10 critical stars. And again, give himself guts for 1 status for 1 time 3 turns. His second skill here is just a hard evasion for 1 turn with defense up for 3 turns of a wonky 18%. Probably needs to be looked at. The weird percentages are something the devs have tried to do away with, but it is the way it is. His third skill here increases his own critical star absorption of buster cards by 5,000%, which is enough to overcome his demerit being a berserker with really low star absorption. And then increases his own critical damage for 1 turn by a whopping 100%, as well as gaining even more stars. Again, all of this on a 4-turn cooldown means you can get back to this relatively fast, should you so choose. He also gets madness enhancement in his passes. His NP, as you guys can see, increases his own critical damage by 100% for 1 turn. So this will expire at the end of the turn that you use his NP, but it does mean that it will affect cards that happen after his NP. So again, doing like an NP Buster Brave Chain with him is going to be really, really solid, as it does mean he will basically have 200% critical damage just in his own kit. And again, the ability to remove 1 enemy's evasion buff activating first means that as long as the enemy has not got like a fight specific gimmick where the evasion is in a, like white box, a border underneath the unit, you basically are going to be able to remove it, not pierce it, but remove it, which is really, really a nice thing for certain pesky enemies. However, I am going to say this hasn't really been a like super used thing over time. It could be something that you could definitely make use of, but you need to find the right situations for it. It'll then deal single target damage to the enemy, and then the overcharge effect is Buster up for 1 turn, activating first by a nice 20% there. So again, he's a pretty serviceable unit. There are other strong units out there, though, including welfares that basically are in the Evocation Festival, like Jerker. So I don't think he's a unit that you got to have by any stretch of the imagination, but he is absolutely the epitome of Buster Crit Man and Oonga Boongaing as a Berserker. And then basically that is your first banner. You also have it paired with Mori. Mori is very much a like just sort of fun card-based challenge unit. He's glass cannon, doesn't really have a whole lot of survivability, and as he keeps attacking enemies, he basically ends up giving himself defense down. I don't necessarily recommend it unless you're out for the challenge, but he is an interesting unit nonetheless. Taking a look at the rate of craft essences from rolling. Seaway Meteor Shower here is invuln pierced with crit damage and NP damage, so this is definitely a very solid one. Northern Willow is nothing really too much to write home about, and aside from the artwork on the 3-star, really nothing too much to write home about there either. Your second summoning campaign is the return of some old GudaGuda units. Hijikata, as we kind of had already mentioned, was a unit that has come a long way. He's Buster single target. He's a 1 HP memer, as I like to call him, which means that he deals more damage the less health that he has. And he now has guts that can stack with other sources of guts. He has charge. So he is definitely in a lot better spot than he used to be, especially if he can manage to get his health down. Okayest is another interesting single target saber. She's quick. She basically has some of the best performing cards in the entire game, and her Shikuchi buff is interesting. The fact that it allows her flexibility to card both before or after her NP. However, basically it incentivizes you to card pre-NP to get the extra attack stacks on her NP. I do sort of dislike that because one of the ways that Okayest was used for a long time was, again, as a unit that could NP, still deal a lot of damage, and then manage to kind of loop back to full just under cards alone. So sort of incentivizing people to use cards before the NP ends up hurting that. But it does mean you have options, and it does mean that you're basically just going to have to think about how to use her. Saito Hajime is still a very loopable single target arts saber. Nothing too much more to say about him. People like him because he looks like Virgil, but that really is all it is. And then Mori added in there as well. Same CEs on rate up for banner number 2. Summoning campaign number 3, however, is the return slash I'm gonna say upgrade to Nagao Kagatora, aka Uesugi Kenshin. And Kenshin here is basically known by many names, but is a very famous character from Japanese history at this point. So Kenshin is going to return to us as a single target arts ruler. Definitely another interesting unit in that regard, because a lot of people are probably thinking, well, do I need a single target ruler? Kenshin is the game's first 5-star single target in that regard. And so at that point, a lot of people thought, well, but I have a really strong Estrella or Martha ruler or something like that. Maybe I don't need her. Kenshin's damage is enough that she basically will outperform the likes of Estrella and such, assuming niches are not necessarily in play and everything. So it is an interesting thing, as she is already a unit that just immediately stands out for damage output. Her attack stats actually not too terrible. It certainly could be worse as a ruler, so it is an interesting thing, but she does trade some of her HP for that. Her NP gain stats not too terrible, and she does have at least 2 4-hit arts cards in the deck. Her, again, kit here basically starts out by giving her critical damage up for 3 turns of 30%, critical star absorption for 3 turns of 500, and evasion for 2 attacks 3 turns for some hard survivability. Her second skill here is arts up for 3 turns, self-charge of 50%, and critical stars every turn for 3 turns of 15. Her third skill is a targetable overcharge by 2 stages 1 time for 3 turns, increasing what that target's attack by basically 20% and their NP gen rate by 30% for 3 turns. So again, this one's probably going to get used on her more often than not, but it does at least have that flexibility if you need to use it on somebody else. Now, taking a look at the rest of the kit here, you guys can see the Noble Phantasm is 4-hit single target, and this to me is one of the big reasons to get Kagatora. She will remove all of one enemy's buffs whenever she uses her NP against them before the damage goes out. This makes her a very effective boss killer for a lot of things. However, just be careful, again, as we mentioned before, there are other times where, like, again, it's just a fight-specific gimmick and you can't remove the buff because it's got that white box or border around it. So just be very, very careful with that sort of thing. But yes, otherwise, this will absolutely just carve up enemies. It'll stop them from really being able to do anything to prevent your damage. So it is a really, really nice effect that she has on this. She'll deal damage to that enemy then, and then she will deal super effective damage against enemies that are man attribute, which is definitely an interesting niche for an arts unit. And then from there, her overcharge will also increase her arts up for 1 turn by 20%. So again, if you do have the 2 stages, you can get all the way up to the 30% here, but it is just the 1 turn duration, so it's not like it's going to keep stacking. Still, I do really, really, really like Kenshin in regards to how she is kitted out. I do like the fact that she is a boss killer. Her damage is very solid. And again, the buff stripping is just absolutely phenomenal for her. Do you have to roll her? Again, no, the choice is yours, but I do think she could be a very solid option for your account if you lack somebody that has that buff removal or anything like that. She could definitely be a good option for you. And with her being a ruler, she's just naturally going to be tanky. Again, same sort of CEs on rate up here. I actually ended up closing it out, but we didn't talk about the welfare. Saika Magoichi. Now, Saika is an interesting unit in the fact that she's basically going to end up being another archer welfare for you guys. Again, her being a welfare, you'll get her for free. You'll get all the copies, but this is an interesting thing because you guys look, the attack stat is sub 9k. The HP is, again, a little bit high for a 4-star at least, but certainly nothing really to write home about in terms of overall tankability. She's man attribute, she's got 0.75 charge, and she's basically going to be a quick archer for us. So keep that in mind, as that is part of the reason for the higher NP gain stat. She does at least have 2 quick cards with really good hit counts there, and again, still a singular arts card with 3. Her first skill here is ignoring evasion for 3 turns and party critical damage up for 3 turns by 30%, as well as critical star bomb here of 30. So that's really the big thing about this skill, is the sheer amount of stars it's going to grant you. The second skill is quicken buster up for 3 turns of 30% to each, as well as additional critical damage of 30%. So now she's up to 60. Her third skill is self-evasion for 1 turn, with the ability to draw attention of all enemies by self for 300% for 1 turn. So again, just your standard taunt language, including the increase of NP gen rate here when taking an attack by up to 50%. Now remember, this is the defensive NP gain rate, so this requires her to take an attack. To me, you don't really necessarily want it, but at least it is on the same skill as her evasion. Be careful if you're going up against something with sure hit or invuln pierce, or heaven forbid buff removal. It will absolutely carve you up, but otherwise, again, this is just going to send it basically into the void. And then it also is her charge skill of 20%, so you will have to be careful with how you use that, given the fact that it is also in conjunction with the taunt. Again, she does get item construction for some additional arts performance and critical damage on her arts cards. You guys can see the single target quick NP is a 10 hit NP. Quite the doozy there in that regard. It's going to deal damage to 1 enemy and then reduce their critical attack chance by 20% for 3 turns. The overcharge effect increases quick and buster performance by 20% for 1 turn each before damage goes out. To me, Saika is just kind of an okay unit. I do feel like there's actually just better single target welfares than her for the archers. So to me, I do recommend going with probably either of those two over her. But given the fact she is this event's welfare and this will be coming out on NA, just go ahead and acquire her from the event. Don't wait for the Evocation Festival. She's still not a part of it. So again, you might be waiting for a long time as of the recording of this video. But again, free is free, so you'll always be guaranteed to get more for her in that regard. And that is GudaGuda Super Goryaku. Or Goryokoku. I'm going to get that right one of these times. And that is all of the month of November. Remember, sometime in here as well, you'll probably get a little bit of a shift for Thanksgiving. We'll probably also get the Advent calendar and stuff announced for NA, as this will be sort of end of the year things that we're pretty much used to. And then back here, we also get a Christmas pre-release campaign. Nothing too much to write home about. They just basically ended up teasing who the welfare would be, as well as the quarter cost main quest campaign, more Spirit Vein stones, and that's pretty much it. Christmas of 2023 was an interesting one, and this is the first of our Christmas lottos that is actually a Christmas event, not a fest event, that is designed differently. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, normally the way old lottos for Christmas used to work, you started out with kind of 3 really crappy nodes, and then each day a better node would release until eventually you would end up with sort of the peak node at the end of roughly a 7-day period. You would from there end up having like 4 to 5 days usually to farm it, maybe if you're lucky an entire week, but that was usually the way it worked. And so a lot of people really hated this ramp up style because it basically meant that a lot of people waited until the end to actually farm it. This Christmas event, however, was not like that. This event instead had 90 plus nodes available the entire time. And then the final node about a weekend released that was 90 plus plus. So this does mean that right off the bat, you immediately had good nodes to farm. Maybe not like peak efficiency type deal, but pretty darn close to it. And so a lot of people were way more confident just going hard out of the gate and basically trying to get all of their goals accomplished early in the lotto, just as they would for a fest event lotto rather than Christmas. So again, this was a really, really nice change that they made. They did not continue that necessarily this year on JP with their Christmas event. However, due to a mishap on their end, we ended up getting the best node for the JP event way earlier than we were supposed to, due to, again, maintenance problems that they were having. But again, I would hope that they would continue this on in the future. This was probably my favorite Christmas event structurally in that regard. You guys can see we do have a summoning campaign as well as the welfare here. Just to briefly mention Nemo Santa. He's an interesting one. He is an arts looping AoE writer. And while you might be thinking, well, I don't really necessarily need that. Maybe I've got a really strong Habitrot. Keep in mind, he's welfare too, so pretty much guaranteed to get him as long as you play the event. And in that regard, he can be a good serviceable option for you. I actually have had times that I've used him over, again, units like Habitrot. So again, he does have his benefits depending on what you're trying to do. He is arts AoE, as we already mentioned. You can see he's got the 2 arts cards in his deck. His first skill is party NP damage, critical damage, and attack, as well as increases the attack of group servant allies for 3 turns, 20% on each of those, whereas the normal effects here are only 1 turn each. The group servant ally thing is 3 turns, so just be careful with how you use that skill. The second skill here is a self-guts, basically, of 1 time 3 turns, debuff immunity for 3 turns, which does have some nice challenge applications. And then charge his own gauge by 10% every turn for 3 turns, so he will at least automate some of the charge per turn there. His third skill is Arts Up for 3 turns of 30%, party evasion for 1 attack for 3 turns. So again, he's got that little extra party-wide protection deal. Again, you're probably going to be running him alongside the likes of Castorian stuff, so it shouldn't be too big of a concern. But hey, you never know when you need a little bit more survival added to the comp. And there you go. Also, the ability to charge the entire party's gauge by 10%. So right now, you're probably thinking, well, he doesn't have that much charge. He doesn't really have that much NP gauge. He basically gets 10% per turn. He has 10 that he can do on command. Really not a whole lot. And you'd be right. However, he is a very fluid refunder. You can see he's got a 4-hit AoE NP. He deals damage to all enemies, skill seals them as well for the remainder of the turn. And then it deals extra damage to enemies with evil alignment. So it's super effective modifier, 150% there against evil alignment enemies. So he is a refund-based unit, which means he's going to be a little bit more beholden to the structure of the node, but he can easily loop from 0, especially if you support him right. And again, the super effective damage against evil alignment is just really, really solid for him. So, like I said, I have had times where I've actually used him over a Habitrot, particularly in the last Christmas event, as he was a bonus unit, so I managed to use him to loop over some of the nodes. So again, he can still be a decent option for you. I wouldn't overlook him. Definitely make sure you grab him, but he's not necessarily going to be like your strongest rider or anything like that. Taking a look at the summoning campaigns, we did get Nemo on the summoning campaign. I believe I did talk about Nemo back during Chaldea Boys. He is a decent single target arts rider. He does have quite a bit of charge baked into his kit, but ultimately he's not normally people's first choice. He yet does have anti-void space and anti-waterside battlefield in his kit, but the waterside battlefield's the one he ends up using a lot more. So I do think he's an interesting unit. He is pretty serviceable. He can be your go-to rider for single target needs, but he's not one that a lot of people do end up going after. Nautica here on the banner is actually a pretty interesting one. It's a all attack scaling, pretty rare, ignores defense CE. It does have Buster Up and NP gain rate there, so definitely an interesting and odd combination. Otherwise, the other two here, not necessarily anything much to write home about. Campaign number 2 is Breedomart here. So again, her return from basically Morganfest of the prior year. She's another interesting one. She's a limited AoE quick lancer. Her biggest issue is, again, sort of some of the titans in that class, like Melisson. So to me, she's not necessarily going to be your highest damaging unit there. She does have the anti-rider niche, which is rather interesting. So you can use her effectively. She can be a Black Grail Looper nowadays due to the buffs that she's had. So I do believe that she is a a stronger unit now than she used to be when she first released on JP. But I do believe that she's a unit that you don't have to acquire. Still, it's up to you to determine if you want to roll for a unit like this that's a little bit older on this point. And again, a unit that probably is due in maybe for some more attention, but we'll see. Coming in campaign number 3 is BB Summer and the Return of Ashvataman. So BB Summer is another really interesting one. I believe we've talked about her before, but she's the only one that can basically allow you to card lock your cards in the entire game. She's 50% charging, AoE Buster based Moon Cancer. She also has AoE Drain baked into her kit and a little bit of survivability with both healing and evasion. So again, she does have quite a bit there. But to me, the card lock is the big reason that a lot of people use her. It is probably the most fun aspect, but can also be the most frustrating aspect if you don't end up getting the cards that you want. Just again, up to you to determine if you want to actually roll for her. There are other ways to get various versions of BB, including some via the Evocation Festival. Ashvataman, on the other hand, is a story-locked single-target Buster Archer. He does have a little bit of charge baked into his kit, and similar to Hijikata, he is a 1 HP memer, which means the less health he has, the more damage he does. The biggest issue you're going to have is getting him to the low health. He does at least have guts baked in, but again, that is something to worry about, at least to an extent. And otherwise, I do believe his card performance is pretty interesting, but Hot Wheels is not necessarily everyone's go-to archer or a unit that you have to have by any stretch of the imagination. Coming in campaign number 4 is an interesting one, as it is Ashvataman again, but it's also OG Scotty here. Now, OG Scotty is another interesting one when compared to her ruler counterpart. That is the more newer version of her that's arguably better. OG Scotty has had an upgrade to her NP, though, that has given her quite a bit of attack scaling on it. The biggest issue is getting her to her NP. She does actually have survivability compared to her ruler counterpart, who is decidedly more offensive than her. But again, she can be an option as a unit for more challenge-oriented content, or maybe just a triple Scotty setup, of which some units do work better with that as opposed to double Scotty and Oberon. So again, it's up to you if this is a unit you want to acquire. I do recommend eventually acquiring both Scotties, but it's up to you. This does give you options if you have both, particularly in the face of things like friend supports. And we also get the Friend Point campaign that has the return of Mary Anning. Similar to Nobukatsu, you're also going to get fodder CEs here. Mary Anning came out with the Mississippi event basically last year on NA, and essentially she is making her grand return at this point, which a lot of people were concerned that she would maybe never have other opportunities. So at least they brought her back. This would be your ability to get more coins, more copies of her if you missed them the first time, or really just more coins even for Grail casting if you just kind of want a little bit more. Just keep in mind, this is going to be during a lotto, so it is what it is. A lot of people will be a lot more focused on the lotto than anything else. And that is actually your last event for the year, but just quickly touching on some of the other campaigns here. We have the Satellite Station campaign for Kyoto. Don't really expect NA to get this. They did have some login bonus and a commemorative CE. Who knows? Maybe we get something similar, but they may just end up finding another excuse to give that sort of thing out. They also revealed some of their New Year's info here, but again, that's not for this year, so we don't need to go over it. And basically, they also had the New Year's special broadcast, basically, that they had announced they were going to give out, again, you know, more apples and a ticket there, essentially for people that have cleared story, as well as celebrating the Fate project. And there you go. So other things like basically free quest first time clear at half AP, again, being a thing. All interludes and strengthenings at half AP, a very rare occurrence as of the current point in time on JP. I believe this will be maybe the last one that they actually get that is all of them. Because again, I have a ton of them stacked up on JP, and they have not given an all interludes and strengthenings in a while. And then all advanced quests, also half AP, is an extra sort of please complete your advanced quests incentive. So if at that point you still don't have them all done, feel free. But they also did pair this with another advanced quest released here at the end, as they essentially wanted people to, again, get more stuff done. You can see there are 3 available quests here, including a Lanugo CE, a Proof CE, and a Fang CE. So again, it is what it is. I believe this will be MLB of the Fang CE and the Proof CE if you haven't already done them. Let me just quickly double check that here real fast. Not the Proof one. The Proof one will be part 18. So this will be MLB of the Fang CE is part 17. So you will be getting 3 different MLB CEs this year from your advanced quests. So I highly recommend you guys catch up on them if you haven't already. And that will be it for 2025's banner review. It's a lot shorter than last year, so I'm definitely a lot more pleased with how this one went compared to the prior ones. But again, I hope you guys found it informative. Let me know what you guys think, and which banners are you looking forward to rolling for? I'll be curious to hear you guys' thoughts, and I will see you guys for the next video. Good luck with all of your rolling in 2025, and may the courts be with you.